Some men bury their past so deep they almost forget who they used to be. Logan Hayes was one of them. Until the day a stranger's scream forced him to remember. He had spent 3 years pretending to be nobody. It took 40 seconds to prove he was wrong. If you've ever wondered what a man does when everything he's hiding collides with everything he's protecting, stay with me until the end. Drop a like and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning started the same way most of Logan Hayes' mornings started, with a broken alarm clock, a missing shoe, and a 7-year-old who refused to eat anything that wasn't shaped like a dinosaur. "Dad!" Ava's voice cut through the steam rising from the stovetop. She was sitting at the kitchen table in their apartment on West 47th, feet dangling off the edge of the chair, bowl of cereal untouched. "You put the wrong kind." Logan turned from the eggs. "It's the same cereal we always have." "It's not the dinosaur kind." He looked at the box. Blue label, blue text, cartoon elephant on the side. He had grabbed the wrong one at the corner store 2 nights ago and hadn't thought much of it. "It's the elephant kind," Ava clarified, as though that explained everything. "Elephants are good," Logan said. "Elephants are very big and very strong." "I don't want to eat something strong," she said, with the particular conviction of a child who has thought this through. "I want to eat something cute." He set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her instead. She looked at them. He looked at her. Outside, the city was already awake. Trucks on the overpass, horns, somebody's radio, a dog that had been barking every morning since March. Logan had long since stopped hearing most of it. What he still heard was the smaller stuff, the way Ava's spoon hit the bowl when she finally gave up on arguing, the way she breathed when she was tired, little exhales through her nose, the specific creak of the third floorboard in the hallway when she walked to the bathroom at night, which always woke him before she got to his door. He noticed small things he had been trained to. The training was supposed to have stayed behind in another life. "We have to go by the jewelry store today," he said, scraping the pan, "after I drop you with Mrs. Campos." "Why the jewelry store?" "Because Mr. Hargrove wants to buy his wife something and he asked me to pick it up for him." He paused. "Don't ask me why he can't do it himself." "Why can't he do it himself?" Logan turned off the burner. "Get your backpack." Halt. Raymond Hargrove was the site foreman on the Meridian Tower renovation on South Michigan Avenue, which was the job Logan had been on for 6 weeks, and which, if it held together another 3 months, would cover rent through spring. Raymond was 61 years old, had bad knees, and had been married to the same woman for 34 years in a way that seemed to involve a constant state of low-level apology. His wife's birthday was Tuesday. He had written the order name and the store address on a Post-it note and pressed it into Logan's palm Friday afternoon like he was handing over classified documents. "Don't let them substitute the clasp," Raymond had said. "She'll know." Logan didn't know how she'd know. He didn't ask. The store was called Ellison and Vance, and it sat on Michigan Avenue between a high-end hotel and a restaurant with no sign on the door. Logan had walked past it plenty of times without ever looking twice. It was the kind of place that kept its front window mostly empty. One piece on a velvet stand, lit from above, enough to tell you the price without putting numbers on anything. He had parked 3 blocks north and walked down with Ava's hand in his, which meant walking slowly, because Ava stopped every 40 feet to investigate something. A pigeon with a damaged foot, a storm drain with interesting rust patterns, a man in a yellow coat who was eating a sandwich and appeared, to Ava, to be doing so incorrectly. "He's not going to share," Logan said, redirecting her. "I wasn't going to ask." She said it with dignity. The store had a heavy glass door with a brass handle, the kind that opened slower than expected. A small bell above it. Temperature controlled inside, the kind of cold that was polite rather than aggressive. 2 display cases ran along either wall. A woman behind the far counter looked up and performed a rapid, nearly invisible assessment of Logan. Worn work boots, Carhartt jacket with a torn pocket, a week of beard he hadn't gotten around to addressing, and then looked back down with a practiced neutrality that said, "We'll see." Logan was used to that. He had the Post-it in his pocket. He was here to pick up an order. He led Ava to the nearer display case, the one with bracelets, because it was something to do while he waited for the woman at the counter to finish with the customer ahead of him. Don't touch the glass, he said. Ava pressed her nose against the glass. Ava? She pulled back and left a small fog circle. Are those real diamonds? Some of them. They don't look different from the fake ones. No, Logan said. They usually don't. That was when the door opened. He noticed her the way he noticed most things, with a peripheral awareness that cataloged without staring. A woman, early 30s, dark coat, good shoes, carrying herself with the particular confidence of someone who expected the room to rearrange itself slightly when she entered. She had dark hair pulled back and a phone in her hand she wasn't looking at. She came in alone. She walked to the counter at the back, past the woman behind it, and went through the side door that Logan had clocked when he walked in, the one that probably led to the private consultation room. Staff knew her. That was the read. Or she came here often enough that the protocol was already established. Logan returned his attention to the display case. Ava had moved down along it, examining each piece with the focused scrutiny of a museum docent. Dad, she said quietly, this one has a crack. It's a setting. It's supposed to look like that. How do you know? Because it would cost more if it was broken. She considered this. That's weird. Yeah, Logan said. A lot of things are. What happened next took approximately 2 minutes and 40 seconds, though Logan would not be able to account for all of it the same way afterward. He heard the van first. A commercial panel van, large engine, braking harder than it needed to for a midday stop. He heard it because the sound was wrong, too abrupt, too close to the curb, not the rhythm of someone looking for parking. His body noted this before his mind finished the sentence. A door, heavy-soled boots on pavement, multiple sets, moving fast. Then the front door of Ellison and Vance swung open hard enough that the little bell didn't ring so much as clatter, and the first man through was already wearing a mask. There were 3 of them. 2 through the front, 1 held the door. The first 2 had weapons up before the door finished swinging. Short-barreled, suppressed, the kind of hardware that said this wasn't improvised. They were wearing dark jackets over body armor, which Logan could tell from the way the fabric sat across the chest. Their movements were deliberate, not panicked, not impulsive. This was not a crime of opportunity. On the floor, the first one said, calm voice, controlled. Everybody, right now, you move when we say you move. The woman behind the counter made a sound that was half scream, half exhale, and dropped. The customer who had been ahead of Logan went down on his knees with his hands up. Logan was already crouching, not because he'd been told to, but because he'd put himself between Ava and the nearest man in the first second, and crouching made him smaller, less visible, less of a problem. Down, he said to Ava very quietly. Flat on your stomach, don't look up. Dad, Ava, he said at once, the way that meant this was not a discussion. She went flat. Logan put his hand on her back and stayed low. He was close to the display case, pressed to it, angled so he could see both men without appearing to look. He cataloged. The man nearest the door, about 6'1", right-handed, muzzle discipline poor, kept sweeping left where there was nothing to sweep, nervous. The second man, shorter, heavier, moving toward the back counter with purpose. This one was the problem. Trained, or at least practiced. The third man was holding position at the entrance, half out the door. Lookout, which meant they expected this to be fast. Fast meant they knew the layout. Fast meant they had a target. The second man went through the side door, the one that led to the private consultation room, the one the woman in the dark coat had gone through. Logan heard it, a raised voice, a sharp command, then the sound of something heavy being knocked over. The man at the door closest to Logan called out, "We clear back there?" A beat. Then the second man's voice. "Got one? Let's move." He came back through the side door with the woman from the dark coat, Vivian Sinclair, though Logan didn't know her name yet. And she was in front of him, his forearm across her throat, not cutting her airway but controlling her movement. Her jaw was set. She wasn't screaming. She was scanning the room, measuring exits and angles the same way Logan was, which he noted with a detached kind of clarity. This one had trained herself not to panic. That was something. She looked at the man behind the counter, at the customer on his knees, at Logan. Their eyes met for less than a second. Something crossed her face. Not a plea exactly, something more specific than that. An acknowledgement maybe. a calculation. Logan looked back down at Ava's hair, his hand pressed flat against her back. Her small ribs were moving. Fast breaths, trying to be quiet. She was frightened, and she was doing what she'd been told, and she was 7 years old. The first man moved toward the front door and waved the third man in. They were extracting. This was going to be over in 40 seconds unless someone stopped it. Logan thought about the weight of the thing he had spent 3 years not being. He thought about the specific way Raymond Hargrove had handed him that post-it, like a man who had learned to ask for help because he had run out of options. He thought about dinosaur cereal and a broken alarm clock and a fog circle on a jewelry case. He thought about what it meant to be a man who could do something and chose not to. He stood up. What he did next was not planned. Planning implied time, and time was not a resource available to him. What happened instead was closer to physics, an object in motion, a sequence of actions that his body knew before his mind agreed to them, 3 years of civilian life peeling back like they were made of paper. The first man was 5 feet away, muzzle still sweeping poorly to his left. Logan crossed the distance in 2 steps and hit the weapon arm from below and inside, a precise upward strike at the inside of the elbow, and the pistol came free. The man had enough training to try to turn, to bring his left hand up, but Logan was already past the outside of his shoulder, one arm across his throat, and he dropped him against the display case with controlled force, enough to put him down without shattering the glass. The man's head made contact, his legs went soft, and Logan let him down to the floor with a hand on the back of his jacket. It took about 4 seconds. The third man at the door had come inside by then, and he registered what had happened approximately half a second before he should have moved. Logan was already turning when the man leveled his weapon, and the distance closed before the man fully processed the math of it. This one was taller, and there was a moment where he almost got his aim corrected, but Logan came in under the muzzle line and drove a palm strike into his sternum, hard enough that the impact traveled up and the man's aim went skyward. One more movement, controlled, efficient, the kind of thing that had been drilled into muscle memory so many years ago that it was stored somewhere beneath conscious thought. And this man went down too. The second man, the trained one, the one holding Vivian, had been watching this from across the room. He tightened his grip on her. "Back up," he said. His voice had changed. Still controlled, but the calibration was off now. He hadn't expected this. "I will put her down right here." Logan was standing in the middle of the store between 2 men on the floor and the display cases and Ava, who had not moved, who was still flat on the floor with her face turned toward the baseboard. He was breathing at a normal rate. "You're not going to do that," Logan said. "You don't know what I'm going to do." "You have one exit and it's behind me," Logan said. "You shoot her, you're not going anywhere. You don't shoot her, you still have something to negotiate with. You know that. Put the gun down." The man's eyes moved. To the 2 on the floor, to the door, to Logan. A calculation happening in real time. His arm was still across Vivian's throat. She had her hands up, palms out. She was watching Logan with an expression that was doing several things at once. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something focused. "Let her go and walk to the door," Logan said. "I'm not the police, I don't have a radio. You walk out, this is over." Another beat. The man was deciding. Vivian decided for him. She moved the way someone moves when they have been told, in some other context, on some other occasion, what to do in exactly this situation, dropping her weight, shifting her center, creating an angle. It wasn't a trained move, not exactly, but it was intentional, and it gave Logan the half-second he needed. He moved on the opening the same way he had moved on the other 2. Direct, efficient, unhesitating. And 30 seconds later, the third man was on the floor with his wrists locked in a position that made moving inadvisable. The store was quiet. Outside, a car passed. Someone's radio. Logan stepped back. He bent down and picked up the weapons, ejected the magazines from each one, cleared the chambers, and set the components on the display case in a row. His breathing was even. His hands were steady. Ava had not moved. "Ava," he said, "you can get up now." She pushed herself up slowly, her hair falling in front of her face. She looked at the men on the floor. She looked at Logan. She looked at the woman in the dark coat who was standing in the middle of the store with one hand at her throat and the other pressed flat against her own chest, catching her breath. "Are you okay?" Ava asked her. Vivian Sinclair looked down at the girl. Her mouth opened slightly. She stopped, started again. Yes, she said. I think so. Good, Ava said, in the tone of a child who has made a decision about a situation and is now prepared to move on from it. She turned to Logan. Can we get Mr. Hargrove's present? Now. The police arrived 11 minutes later. Logan had called it in himself, brief, specific, no extra information, and spent the intervening time with his back to the wall beside the entrance, watching the three men. The woman behind the counter had come out from wherever she'd gone and was sitting on the floor near the back with a phone pressed to her ear. The customer who'd been ahead of Logan had gotten up off his knees, stood near the center of the room for a while looking stunned, then sat down again. Nobody seemed to know what to do with Logan. Vivian Sinclair did not sit down. She stood across the store from him with her arms crossed and her coat slightly off one shoulder and watched him with an expression he couldn't read completely. She had composed herself inside of 3 minutes, color back, breathing normal, posture recalibrated. She looked like someone who had decided to treat this as data rather than trauma, at least for now. At some point, Ava had gotten tired of standing and had sat down beside the nearest display case with her back against it, and was now watching the men on the floor with the detached interest of someone watching a documentary. She's yours? Vivian said, across the room, not quite a question. Yes, Logan said. How old? 7. Vivian looked at Ava, who looked back at her without particular concern. You were armed, Vivian said. Back to Logan. No. A pause. You weren't. No. She absorbed this. Those men had weapons. I know. And body armor. The cheap kind, he said. Not bragging, just accurate. You took 3 armed men down in... She glanced at the floor, at the neat row of disassembled weapons on the display case. I don't know. It was very fast. Logan didn't respond to that. Who are you? She said. Logan Hayes. I'm here to pick up a bracelet for my foreman's wife. Something moved across her face. She was deciding whether to push it. She didn't. Yet. Outside, sirens. The lead detective's name was Carver. He had the manner of a man who had been doing his job long enough to stop being surprised by most things, but who had not quite reached the phase where he stopped being annoyed by them. He took Logan's statement in the back corner of the store, away from the others, with a younger officer standing to one side taking notes. Logan told him what happened. He kept it clean, sequential, unadorned. He did not volunteer anything extra. Carver looked at him steadily throughout. You have a military background. Construction, Logan said. Before construction. A beat. I did some things a long time ago that don't apply here. Carver wrote something, or pretended to. You live in the city? West 47th. You do this kind of thing a lot? Pick up jewelry for my boss? Carver almost smiled. Almost. The other thing. I try very hard not to, Logan said, and meant it. He was released 40 minutes later. The 3 men were in custody. The police had collected the weapons. Someone from the store's insurance company had already called, which Logan found slightly impressive. He collected his post-it note, confirmed the order with the woman behind the counter, who now seemed to want to give him everything in the store, and declined twice before accepting just the item on the note. He found Ava sitting with Vivian Sinclair at the edge of one of the display cases. They appeared to be in the middle of a conversation about something. As Logan approached, he caught the tail end of it. But how do you know which ones are the good ones? Ava was asking. The good diamonds? Yeah. Vivian tilted her head. Honestly, you mostly don't unless someone teaches you what to look for. Did someone teach you? Eventually, Vivian said. I had to learn most things the hard way. Ava considered this with the gravity she applied to most things. Me too, she said, nodding. Vivian looked up when she heard Logan's footsteps. Something shifted in her face. Not wariness exactly, more like a decision being made. We're leaving, Logan said to Ava. He looked at Vivian briefly. I'm glad you're okay. Wait, Vivian said. He waited. I don't know how to... She paused. The particular pause of a woman who was extremely good at finding words for things and had briefly run out of them. I want to say thank you in a way that actually means something. I don't think thank you covers it. It covers it, Logan said. It really doesn't. Ms. Sinclair. She said it without flourish. Vivian. Vivian, he said. Those men had one target, and it wasn't me. You're the one who had something to be afraid of today. I just happened to be in the room. She looked at him for a moment. Nobody just happens to do what you did. He had no response to that, so he didn't offer one. He held out his hand to Ava, who took it. They walked toward the door. Logan Hayes, Vivian said behind him. He stopped. I'm going to find out who you are. He turned halfway. I'm a construction worker. It's not a mystery. She was watching him with an expression that was both certain and measuring. It is, she said, but I'll figure it out. Quote. He didn't think about her on the drive back. He told himself that, and then spent most of the drive back thinking about her, not in the way that might have been simpler, not with any particular awareness of the dark coat, or the voice, or the way she had moved when she'd given him the opening. He thought about her the way he thought about things that didn't fit into the structure of his life. With a low-level attention, a background process, something the trained part of his brain filed away without his consent. He dropped off the bracelet with Raymond, who wanted to know what had taken so long, and who then stood in the parking lot holding a small velvet bag and listening to Logan's edited version of events with an expression of progressive and genuine alarm. You took them down, Raymond said. This was not a question. 3 of them, Ava confirmed helpfully. Raymond looked at her. He looked at Logan. He opened and closed his mouth. The bracelet's right, Logan said. Correct clasp. He left Raymond standing in the parking lot. That evening, he made a dinner. Spaghetti with the jarred sauce Ava preferred to anything he made from scratch, which was a fact he had made peace with. And they sat at the kitchen table together in the specific kind of comfortable quiet that had become the texture of their lives. Ava ate with the focused efficiency she brought to most meals. Logan ate less. He was somewhere else, partly. Dad? She said, without looking up. Yeah. Were you scared today? He thought about it. The honest answer was that fear wasn't quite the right category for what he had felt, or rather, what he had not felt, in those 40 seconds. There had been something that might be called heightened, a narrowing of attention, a clarity. But fear was something he experienced in other contexts. When Ava's temperature spiked at 2 in the morning and the pharmacy was closed. When the job site nearly cut hours in November and he'd done the math on the rent 6 times without the numbers improving. A little, he said, because it was truer than saying no and gentler than explaining the rest. Ava nodded. Me too, she said. But you were fast. You stayed down, he said. That was the important part. She seemed to accept this. They finished dinner. He washed the dishes while she did the 20 minutes of reading she was supposed to do each night before bed, which she did on the couch with her feet up and her shoes still on because she considered shoes and couches to be a non-issue. He picked those small battles less and less. Later, after she was in bed and the apartment was quiet, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and looked at the wall for a while. The wall had a water stain in the upper corner that roughly resembled a map of something, though he'd never worked out exactly what. He had looked at it many times over 3 years. He thought about the word Vivian Sinclair had used. Mystery. He thought about the specific tone of it. Not romantic, not accusatory, but analytical. The tone of someone who was already several steps into a process. He thought about how many news cameras had been outside the store. He thought about the fact that he had been on the 6 o'clock news twice in his military career under classified circumstances, and his face had never appeared in either story, and that for 3 years the arrangement had held, and that today was the first day in 3 years that he had done something in public that couldn't be attributed to an ordinary man. The coffee was cold. He didn't heat it up. Outside, the dog that barked every morning had shifted its schedule and was barking now, at nothing, at the dark. Logan sat with the thing he had not said to Vivian Sinclair, which was, I didn't just happen to be in the room. You're right. And you should stop looking into me. And I'm afraid of what you'll find. He didn't say any of it. He had walked out of the store with his daughter's hand in his and a small velvet bag containing a bracelet with the correct clasp, and he had tried to believe that was the end of it. That was the whole story. A man in the wrong place who had done the right thing and walked away clean. He knew better. He had always known better. Some things you could walk away from, and some things walked with you, and the difference was usually determined not by your choices but by someone else's, by who was watching, by who was paying attention, by whether the world had decided you were still a piece on the board or finally, mercifully, off it. The coffee was cold, and the dog was barking, and somewhere across the city, he was already quite sure Vivian Sinclair was looking up his name. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked the locks, front door, both windows, the fire escape latch, the same way he had every night for 3 years. Habit, ritual, the only kind of prayer he knew. He stood in the dark hallway outside Ava's room and listened to her breathe for a moment. Then he went to bed. He did not sleep well. He was 3 days into pretending nothing had changed when Raymond Hargrove dropped a newspaper on the worksite break table and tapped it twice with 2 fingers without saying a word. Logan looked at it. He already knew what it was going to be, but he looked anyway, the way you look at something you've been dreading because not looking doesn't actually make it not exist. The photo was from a security camera, grainy, high angle, the kind of image that shouldn't have been good enough to identify anyone, except that the angle caught him mid-movement, his face turned just far enough toward the lens, and whoever had sharpened it at the Tribune had done a thorough job. The headline read, "Mystery Hero Stops Armed Robbery at Michigan Avenue Jeweler." The subheading, "Who is the man who took down 3 armed men in under a minute?" There was a smaller photo beside it. Ava, sitting against the display case, looking up at something off camera. Her face was partially blurred. Someone at the paper had made that call, but the blur was imprecise. You could still see her hair, the shape of her profile, the way she was sitting. Logan folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. Raymond watched him do this. "That's you," Raymond said. "I know. The news people have been calling the store. The owner told them you didn't want to be identified. That's true." Raymond was quiet for a moment. He was a man who had worked outdoor jobs his whole adult life, and whose face showed it, deep lines, weathered in a way that made him look both older than he was and more permanent than most things. He had known Logan for a year and a half, and in that time had asked him nothing about his life before the job site, which Logan had appreciated more than he had ever said. "You doing okay?" Raymond asked. "I'm fine. I don't mean about the robbery." Logan looked at him. "I know," he said. "I'm fine." Raymond nodded slowly, the nod of a man who didn't believe that but understood there was nothing more available. He picked up his coffee. The break was over. The calls started that afternoon. Logan's cell number wasn't public, but 2 local TV stations found it anyway by Thursday morning, which told him something about the current state of what could and could not be found about a person with modest effort. He let both go to voicemail. A third number he didn't recognize called 4 times in a row, and when he finally answered it on the 4th out of the specific irritation of repetition, the voice on the other end was a woman's, and it was not a reporter. "I found your number through the building permit office," Vivian Sinclair said. "You're listed as a permit holder on a renovation project on South Michigan. I had to call the general contractor's office and tell them I was trying to return a lost item to one of their workers." Logan was standing on a scaffold 40 feet off the ground, and he pressed the phone harder against his ear and turned his back to the wind. "That's a lot of work for a thank you. I told you I'd find out who you are." "You found my phone number. That's not the same thing." "No," she said. "It's not. I found considerably more than that." The wind picked up. Below him, somebody was running a circular saw. "I'd like to meet," she said. "Properly, not in the middle of a crime scene." "I'm at work." "I know. When do you finish?" He looked out at the city. Lake Michigan was a gray line at the edge of everything, flat and enormous, the same color as the sky in a way that made it hard to see where one ended and the other started. 5, he said. "I'll send a car." "I'll take the train," he said, and hung up. But she had given him an address on the near north side, which turned out to be a private members club occupying the top 2 floors of a building that had once been a bank. The elevator required a key card. A woman at the reception desk looked at Logan. Still in his work jacket, concrete dust on his boots, with the same practiced neutrality as the woman at the jewelry store, and led him without comment to a corner table by a window that looked east toward the lake. Vivienne was already there. She stood when he approached, which he hadn't expected. She looked different from the store. Same composure, same precision in the way she occupied space, but the dark coat was gone, and she had the look of someone who had finished a long day and was carrying it without complaint. Her eyes were sharper than he'd remembered. Or maybe he'd been in motion when he'd first seen them and hadn't had the attention to spare. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You said you found out who I am," Logan said, sitting down. "What does that mean exactly?" She sat across from him and folded her hands on the table. "It means I had my research team run your name. It means I found a social security number that leads to a construction license issued 3 years ago and no history before that. It means the Logan Hayes, who supposedly grew up in Dayton, Ohio, has a high school listed on his background check that confirmed the enrollment only when they checked a secondary database that, as far as I can tell, was added to the record approximately 3.5 years ago." She paused. "And it means I have a contact at the Department of Defense who told me that the name on your current ID does not match the name on any public military service record, but that certain files at that level are above his clearance to access." Logan said nothing. "I'm not trying to expose you," Vivienne said. "I want to be very clear about that." "What are you trying to do?" "Right now? I'm trying to say thank you to the man who kept me from being taken by 3 armed professionals in a coordinated operation." She held his gaze. "And I'm trying to understand why a man with that skill set is living on West 47th and picking up jewelry for his boss." The waiter appeared. Logan ordered coffee. Vivienne already had water and didn't order anything else. "I have a daughter," Logan said after the waiter left. "I know, 7 years old. Ava." She said it without apology for knowing it. Her school enrollment is under the same fabricated identity. Your rent payments are cash. Your phone is a prepaid. She paused. "You've been very careful." "Apparently not careful enough." Something crossed her face. Not quite guilt. "The robbery wasn't your fault." "No," he said. "But what I did in that store was." He looked at the table for a moment. "I made a choice. I knew the cost of it when I made it. I'm not asking for sympathy." "I'm not offering sympathy," she said. "I'm offering—" She stopped, reconsidered. "I don't know yet what I'm offering. I'm still trying to decide what you need." "I don't need anything from you." "That's not entirely true, is it?" He looked at her. "Someone coordinated that robbery," she said. "Those men had body armor and suppressed weapons, and they knew exactly which room I was in and which door led to it. This was not 3 men who decided on a Tuesday to rob a jewelry store. Someone sent them." She leaned forward slightly. "And now your face is in the Tribune and on 4 news websites and 2 local television segments, and whatever you were hiding from, whoever you were hiding from, knows exactly where you are." The coffee arrived. Logan wrapped both hands around the cup. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said. "Probably not," she said. "I tend to get into things anyway." "That's not a virtue in this situation. It's gotten me this far," she said. And there was something underneath it, not quite bitterness, but the memory of cost. She had paid for things. Whatever she had built, it hadn't come easily, and she knew the difference between risk that was careless and risk that was calculated. He studied her face for a moment. She let him do it without flinching. "My real name isn't Logan Hayes," he said. "I know. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm not asking. The people who might be looking for me, if they've made the connection from the news coverage, they're not the kind of people who send 3 men and stop there." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been running?" "I've been living quietly," he said. "There's a difference." "For 3 years?" "Yes." "Alone?" "With Ava." She looked at him steadily. "Her mother?" He picked up the coffee cup, set it down. "Cancer. 4 years ago. Ava was 3. He said it in the same tone he always used when he said it, which was flat and clean and indicated that the conversation could continue in any direction except that one. Vivienne nodded once. She didn't say she was sorry. He appreciated that. He almost believed it was going to stay theoretical. The threat, the exposure. the sense that 3 years of careful nothing had just been undone in 40 seconds. He almost let himself think it was a manageable problem, a situation that called for heightened caution and maybe a change of neighborhood, and that would be the end of it. Then his phone rang at 7:43 on Friday morning while he was making Ava's lunch, and the number was Ava's school. The woman on the line was Mrs. Parrish, the school's administrative coordinator, and she was using a voice that was working very hard to be calm and achieving it imperfectly. "Mr. Hayes, I need you to come to the school. There's been an incident. Ava is safe." The word safe delivered with slight extra weight that told him she was saying it specifically to prevent him from losing the thread of the conversation. "But there's been an incident, and we've contacted the police, and we need you here." He was in the car in 4 minutes. The school was a low brick building on North Artesian with a chain-link fence around the playground and a front entrance that required a buzzer. Normal security for an elementary school in that part of the city. Logan had evaluated it when he'd enrolled Ava and had decided it was adequate for the life they were living, which had been a life in which nobody was looking for them. 3 police units were in front when he arrived. He parked badly and went inside. Ava was in the main office, sitting on a plastic chair with her backpack in her lap and her arms around it. She looked up when he came through the door, and the expression on her face was one he had seen only a few times. The look that meant she was holding something together by force of will and had been waiting for someone to hand it off to. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said. Her voice was slightly tight. "Did anyone hurt you?" "No." A beat. "There was a man." "I know. Tell me later." He put a hand on her shoulder. "You did good." She nodded. Her arms loosened around the backpack slightly. Detective Carver was standing near the principal's office door, which Logan registered with a specific kind of unease. Either the coincidence meant something or the city assigned robbery-adjacent detectives to anything that might connect, and right now he couldn't tell which. Carver looked at Logan with an expression that had shifted from their first meeting. Less neutral, more measuring. "Mr. Hayes?" "What happened?" Carver gestured toward the principal's office. Logan looked at Ava. Mrs. Parrish, the coordinator, came over and sat next to her and said something quietly, and Ava looked at Logan once before he followed Carver through the door. The principal, a compact woman named Dr. Osei, was behind her desk. A uniformed officer stood to one side. Carver shut the door. At 8:06 this morning, Carver said, a man approached the school's side entrance on the service alley. He had a staff entry proximity card. He let that land for a second. He told the aide at the interior door that he was there to pick up a student, specifically Ava Hayes, and that there had been a family emergency. He had a written consent form with a forged signature. Logan's face did not change. The aide asked for ID. The man provided it. The name on the ID matched a name on the school's authorized pickup list. Carver looked at him. "Can you tell me who Marcus Dell is?" "My brother-in-law," Logan said. "He's in Denver. He's nowhere near Chicago." Carver nodded slowly. The ID was a very good fake. The proximity card was even more interesting. According to school security, that card was coded to match one assigned to a teacher who joined the staff 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. Before the robbery. Before the news coverage. The room was very quiet. "You understand what that tells me," Carver said. "It tells you they had time," Logan said. "They set this up before the store. The robbery was connected." Carver looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you, Mr. Hayes?" "I'm a construction worker." "Don't." Logan looked at the floor, then at Carver. "I'm someone who made enemies a long time ago, in a context I'm not at liberty to discuss, and who has been living quietly for 3 years, and who made a mistake Wednesday by making himself visible." That's a very precise non-answer. "It's the most honest thing I can give you right now." Carver exhaled. He rubbed the back of his neck. "The man at the school entrance ran when the aide called for the principal. We have footage. No plates. He had a car waiting on the alley, but the camera angle didn't catch them. The ID he used was good enough that we're running it against federal forgery databases." He paused. "Which suggests whoever you made enemies with has resources." "Yes," Logan said. "They do." "Are you going to tell me more than that?" "Not today." Carver looked at him with the expression of a man who had decided to be frustrated later, when he had more time for it. "Your daughter cannot go back to that school." I know. You need to make decisions very quickly about where you're going to be tonight. I know that too. He called Vivian from the parking lot while Ava sat in the back seat of the car with her backpack and her shoes still on and looked out the window at the street with the specific stillness of a child who was processing something that didn't fit into any category she had been given yet. Vivian picked up on the second ring. Someone tried to take Ava from school this morning, he said. A beat. Then, are you somewhere safe right now? Parking lot on North Artesian, yes, for the moment. Logan. The first time she had used just his name, or the name he went by. It sat differently than he expected. I have a building on the Gold Coast, 42nd floor, private entrance, 24-hour security on a system I designed myself, and I am the only person with the master access codes. I'm not bringing my daughter into something that she's already in it, Vivian said, not unkindly. That happened this morning. The question now is where she's safer. In an apartment with a chain lock on West 47th, or somewhere with a system that took 4 years and $11 million to build. Logan stood with the phone against his ear and looked at nothing in particular. A woman was walking her dog on the sidewalk ahead. 2 kids on bikes. The ordinary afternoon city proceeding without awareness of any of the rest of it. You don't know what you're taking on, he said. I know I'm not going to sit in my penthouse and do nothing while a 7-year-old is in danger because of something that happened in my presence, she said. This started with me. Those men were there for me. Whatever thread connects them to whoever is looking for you, it runs through me whether I acknowledge it or not. He didn't answer immediately. He was doing the math that he'd been doing since he stood in front of Carver and understood what a proximity card issued 3 weeks ago meant. 3 weeks ago, nobody should have known where Ava went to school. Nobody should have had time to get a man placed near the facility, to fabricate documents, to arrange the jewelry store operation and a school extraction simultaneously. This was not reactive. This was not someone who had seen the news and improvised. This was someone who had been watching him already, which meant the jewelry store hadn't exposed him. The jewelry store had been a test, or a trap, or both. He opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat. Ava looked at him in the rearview mirror. Where are we going? She asked. He thought of the apartment on West 47th, the chain lock, the water stain on the wall that looked like a map, the 3rd floorboard that creaked. Somewhere different, he said, for a little while. Different like an adventure? Different like necessary. She seemed to consider whether that was satisfying. She looked out the window again. Okay, she said, in the tone that meant she was reserving judgment. He looked at the phone still in his hand. Send me the address, he said to Vivian. The building was everything she'd described, and several things she hadn't mentioned. The lobby alone was enough to make Ava stop walking and stand with her mouth open for 3 seconds before she recovered her composure. The elevator moved smoothly enough that you felt it mostly in your ears. The door to the penthouse required a biometric scan and a code, which Vivian entered herself. Inside, the city spread out in every direction. Floor-to-ceiling glass on the north and east walls, the lake enormous and present in a way it never was from street level, lit now by the low afternoon sun that made the water look almost warm. Ava walked slowly to the glass and pressed her forehead against it. I can see everything, she said. Just about, Vivian said. Logan stood inside the entrance and did the thing he always did in new spaces, the inventory that happened before he could stop it. Entry points, sight lines, exits, blind spots. The penthouse had 2 stairwell accesses and 1 elevator, which meant choke points at each. The external glass was the kind that didn't open from inside. Solid thermal pane. Good and bad. No one was coming through the windows. But if you needed to leave fast, there were 3 ways out, and all of them were vertical. Security team, he said. 2 on the lobby level, 1 in the control room on the 39th floor, Vivian said. All vetted personally. I have files on each of them if you want to look. I'll want to look. I thought you would. She moved toward the kitchen. Are you hungry? No. She opened the refrigerator anyway. Ava? Ava, still at the window, said, Do you have dinosaur cereal? Vivian looked at Logan over the refrigerator door with an expression that was trying not to be amused. She's very specific about cereal, Logan said. I can work with that, Vivian said. Guts. He spent the first hour going through the security files she had on her team, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee that was significantly better than the one he'd had at the members club, and he went through each file carefully. Employment history, background, any gaps, any associations that warranted attention. They were clean, or as clean as 3 years of professional hiring could produce. He noted 2 that had prior federal employment, 1 Secret Service, 1 military contracting, and flagged them not because they were problems, but because they were variables. Vivian sat across from him and answered questions when he had them, which he did with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this kind of evaluation before and knew exactly which threads to pull. "You ran background checks on your own security team," he said at one point. "Every 6 months," she said. "The first thing I learned when I started building something worth protecting is that you have to know who's between you and the threat." She paused. "The second thing I learned is that the threat is usually closer than you think." He looked up from the file. "Personal experience?" "I had a CFO who spent 2 years moving money through the company's pharmaceutical supply chain on behalf of a competitor. He sat 3 offices down from mine." She said it without particular heat. "I trusted him because he had impeccable references and a very calm voice." She looked at her coffee. "I learned to look past those things." Logan was quiet for a moment. "The men at the store," he said. "They came for you specifically. You understand that." "I've been understanding that since Wednesday night," she said. "I have my own enemies. Running a pharmaceutical empire creates them efficiently." She met his eyes. "But the attempt on Ava, that's connected to yours." "Yes, which means someone is aware that there's a connection between us. In 3 days." "In 3 days," he agreed, "which means they were already watching one of us when the store happened." She was very still for a moment, the particular stillness of a sharp mind absorbing an implication that opens into something larger. "If they were watching me before the store," she said slowly, "the robbery wasn't just about taking me. It was about seeing who would respond." "It was about finding out if I was still alive," Logan said, "and where I was." The words sat on the table between them. "Who are they?" she asked. Not pushing, exactly, asking from the position of someone who had already decided that the information was necessary and was being patient about receiving it. He looked at the security files spread across the counter, at the city through the windows, at the hallway that led to the room where Ava had been put to bed 20 minutes ago with a bowl of regular cereal that Vivian had acquired through what appeared to be the rapid intervention of a grocery delivery service, and which Ava had inspected with the gravity of a quality inspector before declaring acceptable. "There's a man," Logan said. "His name, the name I know him by, is Colonel Warren Voss. He ran a classified intelligence operation out of a joint task force I was assigned to 8 years ago. I was a team leader. My team was good. Too good, maybe. We got into spaces that we weren't supposed to be in, saw things that were supposed to be compartmented, and we started to understand that the compartmentalization wasn't about national security." He stopped. "It was about covering a network. Contractors, foreign assets, payments moving through military channels. Voss was the center of it." He looked at the table. "When I tried to report it, the report disappeared. When 2 members of my team tried to corroborate it, one of them ended up dead in what was filed as a training accident, and the other one disappeared into a psychiatric hold that lasted until he recanted." Vivian had not moved. "And me," Logan said. "I was given a choice between a court-martial on charges that were entirely fabricated, things I didn't do, dates I could prove I was elsewhere, and a quiet disappearance. I chose the disappearance. I had a pregnant wife with stage 3 ovarian cancer, and I chose the thing that kept us both alive." He exhaled. "She died anyway, but Ava was here, and I'd made a promise." The kitchen was very quiet. "Warren Voss is still active," Vivian said. "Last I knew, he'd moved into a civilian advisory role, defense contractor, the kind of position where your actual work is completely obscured by the title." He looked up. "If he saw my face on the news, he'd know the deal he made with you was no longer holding," Vivian said. "He'd know I was a liability," Logan said, "because I'm the only person still alive who can connect the original evidence to his name. I preserve things, hidden, but accessible if you know where to look." Vivian looked at him with an expression that was doing several things at once. You've been sitting on classified evidence of a military corruption network for 3 years while raising a child alone on a construction worker's salary. I couldn't use it without becoming visible, he said, and becoming visible meant putting Ava at risk. And now you're visible anyway. And now I'm visible anyway, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the lake had gone dark, the sun entirely gone, and the city's lights had taken over, an electric scatter that went all the way to the horizon. Then we don't wait for them to move again, she said. Logan looked at her. You can't just... I have resources, she said. Not boasting, stating. I have people who owe me things. I have a legal team that has taken on the federal government twice and won both times. I have money, which is indelicate to say, but money is how things actually get done in this country, and pretending otherwise is just another way of losing. She leaned forward. And I have a reason to want Voss exposed that has nothing to do with you. The men who came for you at the store, they were professionals, she said. Someone paid for professionals. Someone with access to that level of resource and that level of planning. If Voss is the center of what you're describing, it's entirely possible that the network you uncovered 8 years ago has fingers in industries that have nothing to do with military contracting. She paused. Including pharmaceutical supply chains. The implication settled. We don't know that, Logan said. No, she said. Not yet. He looked at her and thought about all the ways this could get worse and all the ways it was going to get worse regardless of what choices he made in the next 48 hours. He thought about the school parking lot and Mrs. Parrish's carefully controlled voice on the phone. He thought about a proximity card issued 3 weeks ago. He thought about Ava, 2 rooms away, asleep in a bed in a stranger's penthouse. You should understand something, he said. If I start pulling on this thread, it doesn't stop cleanly. The people who will come, they won't care about you being Vivian Sinclair. They won't care about the building or the security system. They will send more than 3 men. I know, she said. I don't think you do. Logan. She held his gaze. I built a pharmaceutical company from nothing in an industry that tries to bury women who don't know their place. I've had my board try to remove me twice. My patents stolen once, and my personal life turned into leverage by people who thought it would work. Her voice was even. I'm not unacquainted with people who want me gone. She stood. The difference is that now I have someone in my living room who knows what he's doing. She picked up her coffee cup and walked toward the window. Get some sleep, she said. You're not going to be useful to either of us running on nothing. Logan sat with the empty kitchen around him and the files on the counter and the city outside performing its indifferent nighttime routines. He thought about how much had changed in 72 hours and how many of those changes were irreversible. He thought about what it meant to stop running. Not yet, but possibly soon. Possibly for the first time in 3 years, there was something here that wasn't running. Something that was, if he was honest, closer to turning around. He didn't know yet if that was courage or just exhaustion wearing courage's coat. He turned off the kitchen light and went to check the locks. He slept 4 hours, which was more than he expected and less than he needed. The guest room Vivian had given him was at the end of the hall, separated from Ava's room by a bathroom with a door that locked from either side, and he had tested both locks before lying down on top of the covers with his shoes still on. The bed was better than anything he'd slept on in 3 years. He barely noticed it. He was too busy listening to the building, the particular acoustics of a 42nd floor that was different from street level in ways that took his ears time to calibrate. Elevators hummed below. The glass contracted in the cold. Wind moved against the exterior in low frequencies you felt more than heard. He got up at 4:30 and went through the penthouse in the dark. Not because he heard anything, because not checking was impossible. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. The east-facing windows showed the lake as a black absence beyond the city lights. He stood at the window for a moment and thought about the files on the counter, still spread from last night, and about Warren Voss, and about the specific mechanics of what Voss would do now that he knew Logan was alive and locatable. Voss was not impulsive. He never had been. He was the kind of man who planned sequentially, and who, when a plan was interrupted, began a new plan from the next logical step, rather than reacting with anger. The jewelry store had been interrupted. The The school attempt had been interrupted. He would not see these as failures. He would see them as information. What Voss now knew, Logan was in Chicago. Logan had a daughter. Logan had, in the space of 72 hours, made contact with Vivian Sinclair and was likely inside her building. The exposure of his face on the news was no longer the problem. The problem was that Logan had stopped running and Voss was very good at hitting stationary targets. Logan went back to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about this until 5:15 when he heard Ava's door open and the specific soft-footed walk that meant she was navigating in the dark without turning on the lights, which was a thing she did because she had decided that turning on lights at night was for people who hadn't gotten used to the dark. She appeared in his doorway. "I'm awake," he said, before she had to ask. She came and sat beside him on the edge of the bed, her shoulder against his arm, her feet dangling. She was wearing the socks with the avocados on them that she wore exclusively as sleepwear because she had decided they were pajama socks and not daytime socks, a distinction that was absolute and non-negotiable. They sat like that for a while without talking. "Are we going back to our apartment?" she said finally. "Not yet." "Are we in trouble?" He thought about the word. Trouble was what you were in when the situation was recoverable with enough effort. He wasn't sure that was precisely the right category, but it was close enough for a 5:15 conversation with a 7-year-old. "We're in a situation," he said. "I'm working on it." "Is Vivian helping?" "Yes." Ava nodded. She seemed to find this acceptable. She trusted competence in adults the way she trusted facts, empirically, based on evidence. She had seen Vivian move through her own crisis with a certain quality of self-possession, and she had watched Logan defer to Vivian's security system without argument, and from these 2 data points she had apparently constructed a working theory. "She's smart," Ava said. "Yeah," Logan said. "She is." "Are you friends?" He paused. "I don't know yet." "You should figure it out," she said. "She has very good cereal now." By 7 in the morning, Vivian was already at the kitchen island with a laptop and 2 phones and a legal pad covered in handwriting that moved at an angle, as though her thoughts moved faster than the line. She was in a gray pullover and her hair was down, which changed her face in a way Logan registered and then didn't examine further. She looked up when he came out. "Coffee," she said and pointed without looking up from the screen. He poured a cup and stood at the counter opposite her. "How long have you been up?" "Since 3:30. She turned the legal pad toward him without preamble. "These are the pharmaceutical contracts I know about. 3 government supply deals through a defense-adjacent procurement channel. The same channel 2 times. She pointed to a line. "This contractor, Meridian Defense Solutions. They appear in 2 of my blocked bids over the past 18 months. I didn't think much of it then because losing government bids is normal and the reasons are usually financial, but last night I pulled the corporate registration." She looked up at him. "Meridian Defense Solutions shares a registered agent with a holding company called Kessler Group. Kessler Group is the parent of a private intelligence contractor that was cited, unnamed, in a congressional audit 2 years ago for irregular payment processing through military logistics networks." "What?" Logan was very still. "You've heard of Kessler Group," she said. It was not a question. "Voss moved to Kessler 8 months after I disappeared," Logan said. "I tracked it from a distance. He's their chief strategy officer." Vivian closed the laptop. "So the men who came to the store for me were connected to the same network that's been blocking my government contracts and trying to acquire access to my pharmaceutical supply chain for 2 years. She said it with the particular flatness of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed and is deciding how angry to be about it. "They want your distribution network," Logan said. "A pharmaceutical supply chain at the scale of yours. You can move product through it that has nothing to do with medicine. The logistics infrastructure, the customs relationships, the government contracts that don't get inspected the same way." He looked at her. "That's not a coincidence. They've been building toward your company for a while." "And the robbery," Vivian said, "was supposed to look like an unrelated crime. Take you, apply pressure, get access. Or if you didn't cooperate, remove you and install someone more amenable to the arrangement." He set down the coffee cup. "Except I was in the room." "And now they know you're alive. And you know about Kessler, and I know about Kessler," Vivian said. "Which makes both of us problems that need to be resolved before we can use what we know." The building was quiet around them. 42 floors below, Chicago was moving through its morning with complete indifference to all of this. "I need to make a call," Logan said. "There's a man, retired now, Brigadier General Marcus Webb. He was my commanding officer before Voss. He's the one who told me to run when the charges appeared. He gave me the documentation I needed to set up the cover identity. He's been quiet for 3 years because he had nothing to move with." He paused. "He might have something now." Vivian's expression was careful. "Can you trust him?" "I trusted him with my daughter's life when she was 3 months old and her mother was dying," Logan said. "Yes." He made the call from the building's rooftop terrace, which required a separate key card, and which was, at 7:45 on a November morning, empty and bitterly cold, and therefore exactly the level of private he needed. Webb picked up on the third ring with the voice of a man who had been awake for hours and was not surprised by the call. "I saw the news," Webb said before Logan spoke. "I know. Are you secure?" "For now, Vivian Sinclair's building, Gold Coast." A pause. "Sinclair Pharmaceutical." "Yes. That's either very smart or very complicated." "Both," Logan said. "Voss has a connection to her company. I need you to tell me what you have on Kessler Group." Webb was quiet for several seconds, long enough that Logan could hear traffic on whatever street he was near, which meant he was outside too, which meant he had been expecting exactly this kind of call and had taken himself somewhere he could speak freely. "I've been building a file for 2 years," Webb said finally. "Carefully, through channels that don't connect back to me directly. I have payment records. I have communication logs between Kessler and 3 former intelligence officers whose names you'll recognize. I have a sworn statement from a signals analyst who was on your task force and who recanted under duress 3 years ago and has been willing to put it back on the record for the last 8 months. He paused. "I've been waiting for the right moment to move, because if we move wrong, Voss has enough protection that it all gets buried and everyone involved ends up in a situation I can't recover them from." "We don't have the luxury of waiting for the right moment anymore," Logan said. "He's already made a move on the daughter." Another pause. Longer. "Is she okay?" "Yes. They didn't get to her, but they were inside her school's security system 3 weeks ago. This was planned before the store, before I was visible." "Which means he had eyes on you already," Webb said. "Or on Sinclair, and I walked into his field of vision." "Either way, you're past the containment phase," Webb said. He sounded like a man making a decision he had been turning over for a long time. "I can be in Chicago by tonight. I have a contact at the Tribune, not a reporter, the paper's legal counsel, who has an interest in this story that goes beyond journalism. And I have a relationship with the Deputy Inspector General's office that I've kept deliberately warm for 18 months. How long to move the file into a position where it can't be suppressed? If everything holds together, 48 hours to get the evidence into the right hand simultaneously. The key is simultaneous. The moment one office has it, Voss's people will try to move on the others. We have to hit multiple points at the same time." He won't wait 48 hours, Logan said. "He knows where I am now." "Then we make the 48 hours survivable," Webb said. "I'll call you when I land." Logan stood on the rooftop with the wind coming off the lake, at a temperature that had no patience for November, and looked at the city spread below him. The grit of it, the gray of the water, the absurd persistent height of the buildings against a sky that was the color of old concrete. He had spent 3 years making himself small in this city, occupying its margins, trying to exist in a way that cast no shadow. He thought about what it felt like to cast a shadow again, whether it felt like reclaiming something or just making yourself a target. He went back inside. The attack came at 11:17 that night, not because Voss was impulsive, because he had calculated exactly what 48 hours meant and had decided not to give Logan those 48 hours. The first indicator was the security system. Vivian's control room on the 39th floor was staffed overnight by a man named Garrett, the former Secret Service agent Logan had flagged as a variable. And at 11:14, he called up to the penthouse line and said, in a voice that was working too hard at neutral, "Mr. Sinclair, I'm showing an anomaly on the east stairwell camera. Probably a technical fault. I'm going to step out and check the junction box." Logan was in the kitchen when the call came through on the apartment's intercom. He heard it because Vivian had it on speaker while she worked. He was across the room before the call disconnected. "Don't let him leave the control room," he said. Vivienne looked at him. "Call him back. Tell him to stay in the room and lock the door." He was already moving toward the front entrance, running his own calculation. An anomaly on the east stairwell camera at 11:14. A staff member being drawn out of the control room. These were not coincidences happening in sequence. They were a sequence happening with intent. "Garrett," Vivienne said into the intercom, "stay in the control room. Lock the door." A beat. Then Garrett's voice. "Miss Sinclair, it's probably just—" "Lock the door, Garrett." A pause. "Yes, ma'am." Logan had already moved to the hall closet where, over the previous 14 hours, he had quietly relocated certain items from the building's maintenance level that Vivienne's security team kept for emergencies. A decision he had made without asking permission, and which Vivienne had noticed and not objected to. He did an inventory that took 4 seconds. He came back to the living room. "How many stairwells?" he said. "East and west," Vivienne said. She was standing now. "And the elevator." "Elevator is a kill box. Don't use it." He looked at her. "Where's Ava?" "Asleep." "Get her. Bring her to the kitchen. Stay away from the windows." Vivienne moved without hesitation, which he noted because it mattered. In a situation that was about to move fast, the difference between someone who argued about instructions and someone who executed them was sometimes the difference between outcomes. He went to the east stairwell door, the one inside the penthouse that led to the private roof access, and put his hand flat against it and listened. Building acoustics were their own language, and he had spent the previous 24 hours learning this building's specific dialect. What he heard now was the stairwell absorbing sound differently than it had absorbed it yesterday. Weight on the steps, distributed across multiple points, moving with discipline. More than one person. He stepped back from the door and did the math he'd been doing since he left the military, and which he had thought, for 3 years, he would never have to do again. Distance, angles, choke points, timing. How many could be on the stairs given the sound distribution? Probably 3, possibly 4. Whether they'd split to cover both stairwells simultaneously? Yes, almost certainly. Whether they knew the layout of the penthouse? They had access to a school security system 3 weeks in advance, which meant, yes, they'd had time to acquire architectural plans, which meant they knew the kitchen was the furthest point from both stairwell entries. He went to the kitchen. Vivienne was there with Ava, who was awake and wearing the avocado socks and looking at Logan with an expression that said she understood this was not a normal situation, but was waiting for him to define exactly what category it fell into. "Stay low," he said to both of them. "Behind the island." Ava got behind the island. Vivienne crouched beside her without being told twice. "There are people in the stairwells," he said. "How many?" Vivienne said. "Enough." He looked at her. "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "I need you to keep her talking," he said. He looked at Ava. "Whatever happens in the next few minutes, you stay here. You don't move unless Vivienne tells you to move. You understand?" "Yes," Ava said. Her voice was clear. She was frightened. He could see that. Her hands were pressed flat against the floor in the way she pressed them flat against surfaces when she was trying to be very still. But she was holding it. She was always holding it. He didn't know where she had gotten that from. Her mother, maybe. The parts of her mother that had held on far longer than the medicine said she should have. "I'll be right back," he said. He moved to the living room. What happened in the next 11 minutes was not a clean thing and would not have looked, to any outside observer, like the efficient sequence of movements it was from inside Logan's perspective. It was loud in places and completely silent in others, which was its own kind of disorienting. It involved both stairwell doors and the specific use of the penthouse's layout as a variable rather than a liability, which Logan had been quietly planning since the first morning he'd walked the space. The east stairwell entry opened first. 2 men, body armor, tactical configuration, more professional than the 3 at the jewelry store, but operating in a space with limited angles and a man who already knew their entry point. Logan had positioned himself at the single blind spot that the architectural plans would show as a cleared sight line, the space behind the large built-in shelving unit on the east wall that appeared on any floor plan as solid and therefore not a position anyone would account for. He came out of that position on the first man before the team had cleared the door, and the sequence that followed was short and brutal and involved the kind of close-range force that he had spent 3 years trying to forget the weight of. The first man went down. The second man made the mistake of turning toward the sound rather than holding the door, which created the angle Logan needed. The second man went down harder than the first. The west stairwell entry opened 40 seconds later, slightly delayed, which told him the west team had heard something and adjusted, which told him they were communicative and professional. He was already across the room when the west door opened. There were 3 on this side. 3 was harder. The first exchange moved fast and damaged Logan's left shoulder in a way that he registered as a white-hot fact and set aside because the alternative to setting it aside was considerably worse. He put 2 men down. The third was the largest of all of them, 6'3" at least, with the kind of build that came from systematic effort, and who recovered from Logan's first move faster than the others had. They went into the furniture. A glass table didn't survive. Logan's shoulder screamed at him throughout, and he ignored it with the specific practiced discipline of someone who has learned that the body will keep an accounting and simply delays the collection. He ended it against the wall near the west window with a hold that made movement a structural problem for the man's arm. "I'm going to ask you something once," Logan said, breathing harder than he wanted to. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer. Which was the answer? These were professionals who had been briefed on operational silence, which told Logan they'd been hired through channels that knew how this kind of work was done. He made movement inadvisable for a period that would require medical attention and stepped back. 5 men down. The penthouse was very quiet. He stood in the wreckage of Vivian's living room, the glass table, an overturned chair, 2 weapons on the floor that he had cleared, and breathed through the shoulder and cataloged the damage to himself with the detachment of a man filling out a form. The shoulder was bad, but not structural. A cut above his left eye that he hadn't noticed acquiring was dripping into his peripheral vision in a way that was annoying rather than critical. His ribs on the right side had opinions about the last 30 seconds that he was not prepared to entertain yet. He walked to the kitchen. Vivian came around the island before he cleared the doorway. She stopped when she saw the blood from the cut. "You're hurt," she said. "It looks worse than it is," he said, which was partially true. "How many?" 5. He looked at Ava, who had stood up from behind the island and was looking at him with an expression that was complicated in the way that only the expressions of children who are trying to understand something genuinely frightening are complicated. "Are you okay?" he asked her. "You're bleeding," she said. "Yeah, I know. Does it hurt?" "A little." She came forward and very carefully put her arms around his waist, which she could reach from below, and pressed her face against his side. He put his good hand on her hair. Vivian was already on the phone. He could hear her, controlled and precise, telling someone to get the police, telling Garrett to release the lockdown on the control room, telling a third person something in a clipped tone that involved the words legal team. "And tonight, and I don't care what time it is." She finished the calls and looked at Logan over the top of Ava's head. "Garrett," Logan said. He was drawing himself out of the control room. "He's compromised." "I know," she said. "I already called the second team." "You have a second security team." "I told you the system took 4 years to build," she said. There was something in her face, not quite relief, not quite the absence of fear, but something adjacent to both. A woman recalibrating what had just happened against what she had prepared for. "I always build redundancy." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked down at Ava, who had not let go. "The evidence," he said. "Webb needs to move. Tonight. Voss just escalated, which means he's losing patience, and a man like that gets sloppy when he's losing patience. That's the window." "I heard you on the phone this morning," Vivian said. "Webb lands at O'Hare at 10. He'll be here by 11:30. Was that before or after you decided to call your legal team tonight?" "About 30 seconds before," she said. "I was already thinking about it." She didn't look apologetic. "You're not the only one who plans ahead." He almost said something. He was not entirely sure what. The shoulder made certain kinds of thinking difficult, and the living room behind him was a disaster, and Ava was still holding onto his side with both arms, and there was a specific quality to the moment. The 3 of them in a kitchen at 11:30 at night, in the aftermath of something that should not have happened, that was too dense to say anything clean about. "You need to sit down," Vivian said. "I have a first aid kit." "I'm fine." "Your eye has been bleeding for 8 minutes," she said. "Sit down." He sat down. Webb arrived at 11:47. He was 71 years old and still moved like a man who had never fully retired from the posture of command. Straight-backed, unhurried, with the specific quality of a person who had spent decades making other people feel like the situation was containable, regardless of whether it actually was. He shook Logan's hand in the doorway of the penthouse and looked at the living room behind him with an expression that took in the overturned furniture, the cleared weapons on the floor, and Logan's bandaged eye without visible alarm. "I'm getting too old for this," Webb said, which was the most complaint he would offer. He shook Vivian's hand. "General Marcus Webb, retired." "Vivian Sinclair." She looked at him with the same calibrating attention she gave to everyone. "Logan trusts you." "Logan has good instincts," Webb said. Usually. He stayed in that jewelry store instead of walking out the back," Webb said. "That's open to debate." "I would have walked out the back," Vivian said, "and then I'd be wherever those men were taking me." Webb looked at Logan. "Fair point," he said. They moved to the dining table, the one room without evidence of the evening's activities, and Webb opened a hard-sided case that contained a laptop and 2 external drives and a manila folder that was thick enough to require a rubber band. He set these out with the care of a man who had been holding on to them for a long time and was finally permitted to put them down. "This is everything," he said. "Payment records going back 6 years. Communications between Voss and 3 current figures. 1 congressional, 1 in the intelligence community, 1 in federal contracting, that establish a pattern of coordination that a first-year prosecutor could work with. The signals analyst's statement, notarized, with corroborating documentation. And 2 financial audits of Kessler Group that were commissioned independently and then suppressed by the contracting committee they were submitted to." He looked at both of them. "I also have a contact at the Department of Justice, not a political appointee, a career attorney, who's been waiting for a file like this for 14 months. "Why waiting?" Logan said. "Because without an active, visible party willing to go on record, it's a file without a face. The system buries files without faces." Webb looked at him. "That's you, son. You're the face of this." Logan was quiet for a moment. "What does going on record mean practically?" he said. "For Ava. New identity, federal protection during the exposure period, after conviction, and with this file there will be conviction, you're clear, your original name restored if you want it, your military record expunged of the fabricated charges." Webb paused. "It's not clean. Nothing about this is going to be clean, but it's survivable." "And during the exposure period," Logan said. "How long?" 3 weeks minimum, could be 6. Logan looked at the table, at the drives, at the folder held together with a rubber band. "Ava can stay here during the exposure period," Vivian said. Both men looked at her. Her voice was even. "She knows this building now. My security team, the one that isn't Garrett, knows her. She'd be safer here than anywhere the federal government puts her, frankly, because nobody outside this room knows she's here." "That's a significant offer," Webb said, looking at her with new assessment. "It's a practical offer," Vivian said. "I'm not doing this for sentiment." She paused. "Well, I'm doing it partially for sentiment, but it's also practical." Logan looked at her. There were things in her face that she wasn't hiding exactly, but that she wasn't leading with either. A kind of offered honesty that she was leaving it to him to acknowledge or not. He thought about 3 years of a life organized entirely around one principle, which was that letting anyone close was a cost he couldn't pay. He thought about a woman in a dark coat who had looked at him across a crime scene in progress and done a calculation instead of screaming. He thought about how poor his judgment had been tonight, which was not at all, and how that was the first time in 3 years he could say that about a situation involving another person. 48 hours, he said to Webb. "We move in 48 hours. Webb nodded. "I'll make the calls first thing. And Voss," Logan said, "he'll know the window is opened once we start moving. He'll try to move first." "Then we don't give him a first," Webb said. "We give him a simultaneous, all at once, across every pressure point, before any single one of his protections can call the others. He looked at Logan with an expression that was about the longest possible distance between now and 8 years ago, and also, somehow, about the shortest. You did everything right back then, son. It just wasn't enough because you were doing it alone. He put his hand briefly on Logan's good shoulder. You're not alone anymore. Logan looked at the table and thought about that, about what it cost to believe it and what it cost not to. Outside, the lake was doing what it always did, which was existing without regard for any of the things happening to the people on its shore. Cold, enormous, indifferent in the way that large things are indifferent. Not cruel, just proportionate. Logan had looked at it from this window for 2 days now, and each time it had done the same thing it did to him that it had always done. Since the first time he'd seen the ocean from a flight deck 20 feet above the water, reminded him that most of what felt catastrophic was actually very small, and that small things could be survived. He picked up one of the external drives from the table. Walk me through the financial records, he said to Webb. I want to understand exactly what we're working with. Webb opened the laptop. They worked through the night. They worked until 4 in the morning, and by the time Webb closed the laptop, the table was covered in handwritten notes and printouts and 3 empty coffee cups, and the particular kind of exhausted clarity that only comes from spending hours inside a problem until the problem stops being overwhelming and starts being specific. The file was better than Logan had expected. Not perfect, evidence rarely was, but coherent in the way that mattered, which was that it told a story any reasonable person could follow. Payment records that moved through 4 shell companies before landing in accounts connected to Voss's personal financial network. Communication logs, emails, encrypted messages that had been recovered through a signals intercept Webb's contact had preserved that showed coordination between Voss and a congressman named Gerald Hatch, who sat on the Armed Services Committee and who had, for 6 years, ensured that Kessler Group's contracts were never subjected to the level of oversight they warranted. A federal procurement officer named Sandra Lyle, who had approved 11 contracts totaling $400 million over 4 years, while receiving payments through a consulting firm that existed on paper only. And the statement from the signals analyst, his name was Danny Reyes, 29 years old when Logan's team had found the first irregularities, 37 now, and living in Portland under a name that was nearly his own, who had recanted under duress in year 1 and had been carrying the weight of that recantation ever since, and who had put his original account back on paper with the specific exhausted relief of someone finally setting down something very heavy. Reyes took a real risk, Logan said. He's been wanting to for a long time, Webb said. He needed to know you were still alive. He needed to know it meant something. Logan looked at the statement. Danny Reyes's handwriting was cramped and slanted right, the writing of someone who thought faster than the pen. He had written 12 pages without stopping, and the last paragraph ended mid-page in a way that looked like he had simply run out of things to add and stopped. Does he know what we're doing? Logan said. He knows the timeline. He's ready. Vivian, who had been sitting at the end of the table for the past 2 hours, listening more than talking, said, The congressional piece is the one that needs to move first. If Hatch gets wind of any of this before the file reaches the DOJ, he has the committee relationships to delay it long enough for Voss to react. She had been thinking about sequencing, Logan realized. Not the legal architecture, which was Webb's domain, but the political mechanics, the pressure points. Hatch needs to be the last person who knows we're moving and the first person who loses his protection. The moment the DOJ has the file and the Tribune's legal counsel has the financial records, and the Inspector General's office has the procurement documentation, Hatch's ability to intervene is gone. Webb looked at her with the expression he'd been wearing since she'd started talking 2 hours ago, which was the expression of a man updating his assessment in real time. You've done this before. Not this exactly, she said, but I've moved against a board that had congressional relationships. The mechanics aren't different. You remove the protection before you make the move visible. The problem is the timing, Logan said. Simultaneous delivery to 3 separate offices in 2 cities. DOJ is Washington, the Inspector General is Pentagon adjacent, the Tribune Council is here. We need people we trust at each point. I have the Tribune covered, Vivian said. My general counsel has a relationship with their legal team. I also have a former federal prosecutor on my board who practiced at the DOJ's criminal division for 11 years. She can walk the file in personally. Logan looked at her. I made some calls last night, she said without apology, while you were sleeping. I slept 4 hours. I made a lot of calls, she said. Webb made a sound that was close to a laugh. She's better organized than half the officers I served with, he said to Logan. Don't tell her that, Logan said. Why not? She'll start giving orders. Vivian's expression was the expression of someone who had already started giving orders and was simply being polite about it. The 48-hour window, she said. That was last night's estimate. Given what happened with the attack, I'd argue we compress. Move in 24. 24 is aggressive, Webb said. 24 is necessary, she said. Voss sent 5 people last night. When 5 people don't come back, he recalibrates. He doesn't know exactly what we have yet, but he knows we're building towards something or he wouldn't have moved that hard. If we give him 48 hours after last night, he'll use them. Logan had been thinking the same thing and had been waiting to say it until he had the full picture of what they were working with. Now he had it. 24, he said. We go tomorrow night. Webb rubbed his face. He was tired in the way that 71-year-old men who had been awake since the previous morning were tired, which was a specific and complete kind of tired that he was pushing through on something other than coffee. I'll make the Washington calls at 6 a.m., he said, before the business day starts, before anyone has a chance to set the day's agenda. Use the secure line, Logan said. I've been using secure line since before you were born, Webb said, and stood with the careful movement of a man whose joints had developed opinions. I'm going to sleep for 2 hours, then I'm going to make calls. He looked at both of them. This is going to work. I want you to hold on to that. He went to the second guest room. The table was quiet. Logan stayed at the table after Webb left, not because there was more work to do right then, but because the alternative was lying in the dark thinking, and the table at least gave him something to look at. Vivian cleared the cups and came back and sat down, not across from him this time, but at the corner, closer, which he noticed without deciding what to make of it. You should sleep, she said. In a minute. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how are you actually doing? The question caught him in a way he didn't fully expect. Not because it was intrusive, but because it was direct in a register he hadn't been asked in a long time. Not the professional register of is the situation manageable, but the personal register of how are you doing with the situation? I'm okay, he said. She looked at him. He stopped. It's strange. Being in it again, I thought I was past it. The training, the reflexes, all of it. I thought I had put it down. He looked at the table. Tonight, it was just there, like it never left. That probably means it didn't, she said. No, he said. It didn't. Is that a bad thing? He thought about it honestly. Tonight it wasn't, he said. But there's a version of that answer I don't like, which is that the thing that makes me good at protecting people is also the thing that kept me from being able to live like a normal person for 3 years. It's the same thing. I can't have one without the other. He paused. I'm still figuring out what to do with that. Vivian was quiet for a moment. I'm not sure those things are as incompatible as you think, she said. Being capable of something and living normally aren't mutually exclusive. They're just harder to balance than either one alone. You balance hard things. I balance hard things very imperfectly, she said, and there was something in it, a specific honesty, the kind that costs something to offer. I'm very good at the work. I am genuinely bad at most of what exists outside the work. I have excellent professional relationships, and I have approximately 2 friends, and one of them I haven't spoken to since June because we had an argument I haven't known how to resolve. She paused. I am telling you this because you seem to be under the impression that I have my life together in ways that I don't. He looked at her. I wasn't under that impression. You were a little. Maybe a little, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. Your daughter, she said. She's remarkable. She's difficult, he said. She argues about everything. She has opinions about cereal that I can't explain. She woke up this morning at 5:15 just to sit with me, and she didn't say anything for 10 minutes. He stopped. She's the best thing I've ever done. I'm terrified every day that I'm not doing it right. You're doing it right, Vivian said. You don't have enough data for that. I have 4 days of data, she said. She's brave and she's perceptive and she trusts you completely without being dependent on that trust. That doesn't happen by accident. She held his gaze. You're doing it right. He didn't say anything. He looked at the table, at the drives and the papers and the rubber-banded folder that contained 8 years of corruption and 3 years of his exile compressed into something a prosecutor could use. He thought about what it meant that they were here, at this table, at this hour, that a woman he had met 5 days ago in the middle of an armed robbery was sitting at the corner of his problem and talking to him like he was a person and not a situation to be managed. "Why are you doing this?" he said. Not suspiciously, genuinely. She was quiet for long enough that he knew she was thinking about the honest answer rather than the easy one. "Because I looked at you across that store," she said, "and I saw someone who was going to let 3 armed men take me rather than expose himself, and then you stood up anyway. And I have been in a lot of rooms with a lot of people who make calculations about what something is going to cost them and then don't do it." She paused. "You did it anyway, and you did it for nothing. You didn't know me. You weren't going to get anything from it." She looked at the window. "I don't meet many people who do things for nothing." "I did it for Ava," he said, "because I didn't want her to see someone taken and know I could have stopped it." "That's also nothing," Vivian said. "That's entirely about what you could live with, not about what you would get." She looked back at him. "That's the kind of person I want to know." The city outside was doing its 3 a.m. thing, which was quieter than its other things, but never fully silent. Somewhere below, a siren moved through and away. The lake was invisible in the dark, its presence indicated only by the absence of lights in the eastern distance. "Try to sleep," Logan said. "We have a long day tomorrow." "I know," she said. She stood, paused. "For what it's worth, whatever comes out of the next 24 hours, I'm not going to regret being in this. I want you to know that." He looked up at her. "You might feel differently depending on how it goes." "I might," she said, "but I don't think so." She went to her room. He sat at the table for another 15 minutes, then turned off the light and went to check on Ava. The next day moved in the specific way that days move when you are waiting for a thing to either work or fail. Slowly in the wrong moments, and then fast when you least wanted it to be. Webb was on calls from 6 a.m. Logan could hear the low cadence of his voice through the guest room door, measured, authoritative, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years being the kind of person other people believed in crises. By 8, he had confirmations from Washington, the career DOJ attorney, a woman named Patricia Huang who had been waiting for exactly this kind of file for longer than Webb had been building it, was ready to receive the package by noon. The Inspector General's contact, a deputy named Frank Caruso who had flagged Kessler Group in an internal review 2 years prior and had been told to drop it, confirmed receipt of his copy by secure transfer at 9:15. Vivian's former prosecutor board member, a woman named Claire Okafor, who took the call at 6:30 from her home in Evanston and said, finally, before Webb had finished explaining the situation, was on her way to the DOJ's Chicago field office by 9 with a physical copy of the financial records. "How many people do you have on speed dial who can just walk into a federal office?" Logan asked Vivian. "Claire is exceptional," Vivian said. "And she's been wanting this specific kind of day for a long time. Some people are very motivated by the right moment." By 10:30, the Tribune's legal counsel, a careful, deliberate man named Howard Park, who had been Vivian's contact for 3 years and who asked 3 careful questions before agreeing, had the financial records and the communication logs. He read for 40 minutes. Then he made his own call to his paper's investigative editor, which was the last piece of the structure Vivian had been building since 4 a.m. It was almost elegant, Logan thought, watching her work. Not because it was effortless. He could see the effort, the constant recalibration, the moments where a call didn't go the way she expected and she adjusted without breaking stride. But because she understood leverage. She understood which node in a network, if you pressed on it correctly, caused the whole thing to move. He had understood that in military terms for years. Watching her apply the same principle in a completely different architecture was something he found himself paying more attention to than strictly necessary. At noon, Webb called all 3 contacts simultaneously from different phones. Vivian on one, Logan on another, himself on the third. confirming that all parties had the materials and were proceeding. The simultaneous confirmation was the signal. From this moment, Voss's protection network would begin to crumble in sequence, each node losing its ability to suppress the information before the next node was aware of what was happening. At 12:47, Logan's phone rang. The number was unknown. He answered it. "You've made a mistake," said the voice on the other end, and he recognized it immediately. The flat, controlled tenor of Warren Voss, who Logan had not heard speak in 8 years and who sounded exactly the same, which was the most unsettling thing about it. "Whatever you think you've built, it's not going to hold. You understand the people involved. You understand how this works." "I understand exactly how it works," Logan said. "I've been watching it work for 8 years." "Then you understand that files get lost, witnesses recant, attorneys get reassigned." A pause. "Walk away, Logan. Take your daughter somewhere quiet. This doesn't have to end badly for either of you." "You sent 5 men to this building 2 nights ago," Logan said. "That conversation is over." A beat. "Those weren't my men." "Warren, I'm telling you, I have the payment transfer," Logan said. $12,000 through a Kessler subsidiary to a private security broker in Bridgeview, 3 days before the attack. The broker's name is Felix Mara. He has a prior working relationship with Kessler going back to 2019. He paused. "I also have the jewelry store. Same broker, different team, different target, both traceable." Another pause. "The file is already in 3 offices. Patricia Huang at DOJ has it. Frank Caruso at the IG has it. Howard Park at the Tribune has it. As of this morning, the congressional liaison at the Senate Armed Services Committee has been notified that material evidence involving a member's potential coordination with a federal contractor under investigation will be delivered by end of business today. Gerald Hatch's office has already called the DOJ once to ask questions, which tells me his protection is already starting to understand what's happening." The line was silent for several seconds. "You've been busy," Voss said. His voice had changed, not cracked, not panicked, but recalibrated. The voice of a man doing new math. "I had help," Logan said. "Sinclair. Among others." Another silence. Logan waited. Outside the window, a cloud moved across the sun and the lake went from blue-gray to darker gray in the space of a second. "This will take time," Voss said finally. "Investigations take time. Things happen in that time. If anything happens to me, or my daughter, or Vivian Sinclair, or Marcus Webb, or Danny Reyes, or Claire Okafor, or any of the people who've touched this file," Logan said, "a set of additional materials goes to 6 more locations simultaneously, including 2 international press organizations. I built the dead man contingency before I called anyone this morning." He paused. "You taught me to plan ahead, Warren. I learned from you." The line went dead. Logan lowered the phone. He was standing in the living room. The furniture had been rearranged to cover the worst of the damage from 2 nights ago. A new glass table was on order, which Vivian had arranged with the same efficient practicality she applied to everything. It didn't look right yet, the room, but it functioned. Vivian was standing in the kitchen doorway watching him. "How did he sound?" she said. "Like a man who knows the structure is falling," Logan said. "He'll try something. He might try something significant, but he's past the point where he can stop it, and I think he knows that. How long before we know if it's working?" Webb thinks 48 hours for the first official moves. The congressional peace could break faster. Hatch is a political animal. He'll see the writing first and try to negotiate rather than fight. Logan looked at the phone in his hand. "The dangerous period is now, between when Voss knows and when he loses enough protection that moving on us becomes irrational." "How long is that period?" "Could be hours. Could be 2 days." He looked at her. "We need Ava out of the city." Vivian nodded. She had already been thinking about this. He could tell from the absence of surprise in her face. "I have a property in Michigan, Door County. Small staff, full security system, isolated enough that approach is visible from any direction. My assistant can have it ready in 3 hours." "You'd trust her with that?" "Mara has worked for me for 6 years, and her brother is a Chicago PD detective," Vivian said. "Yes." "I'll take Ava up tonight," Logan said. "Webb goes with her. He's the safest person to have in that house. He knows the protocols, and he has relationships that make harming him exponentially more complicated. He paused. I'll come back. Vivian looked at him. You don't have to. Yes, I do, he said. If Voss moves on this building before the protection falls, I need to be here, and I'm not leaving you in the middle of this. She held his gaze for a moment. That's not a tactical argument, she said. No, he said. It's not. She looked away briefly, then back. Okay, she said. He told Ava at 2 p.m, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of juice he had poured for her that she was ignoring in favor of examining one of her shoelaces, which had developed an interesting fray. You're going to Michigan, he said, with General Webb for a few days. She looked up. Without you? I'll come in a day or two. She looked at the shoelace, then at him. Is it still dangerous here? Getting less so, he said. But yes. And you have to stay because I need to make sure certain things finish the right way. She turned this over. He watched her face, the specific machinery of her thinking, which was visible in her if you knew where to look, a slight tension around her eyes, and a stillness in the rest of her face that meant she was working through something. Will you call me? She said. Every night. And you'll actually come. Yes. Promise. I promise. She pulled one end of the fraying shoelace and looked at it. Vivian should come to Michigan too, she said. She's safer in Michigan. Vivian is going to stay here and help me. Ava looked up with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. Does she want to do that? Yes, Logan said. Okay, she said. The shoelace went back to normal. But tell her she should visit Michigan after. It's supposed to be nice. I'll tell her. Mad. Webb and Ava left at 5:30 in a car that was not associated with any of them, driven by a security team member Vivian had used for private transport for 4 years. Ava said goodbye to Vivian in the lobby with the specific solemnity of someone who has decided that a relationship matters and is marking the transition appropriately. She hugged her around the middle, briefly but with intention, and then walked to the car with her backpack and did not look back, because she was the kind of person who did not make goodbyes longer than they needed to be. Webb shook Logan's hand in the lobby and held it for a moment. It's going to hold, he said. The same words as the night before. Logan nodded. He watched the car pull away. Then he went back upstairs. The call from Patricia Huang at the DOJ came at 7:42 that evening. Vivian took it on speaker at the kitchen island with Logan standing across from her. Huang's voice was measured and careful and said several things in the specific language of federal process that meant translated. The file has been received, it has been assessed, it is being acted upon through channels that cannot now be stopped. She used the phrase material evidence of significant scope twice. She confirmed that a federal grand jury had been convened on an emergency basis, a thing that happened rarely and that required a specific threshold of immediate national interest. She also said, I need to speak with Logan directly at some point in the next 24 hours. His testimony is going to be central. He's available, Vivian said, looking at Logan. I'm available, Logan said. After the call ended, the kitchen was very quiet for a moment. That's it, Vivian said. That's the first real piece. There'll be more calls, Logan said, and it'll get messier before it gets cleaner. These things always do. I know, she said. She looked at the phone on the counter. How do you feel? He thought about the question. He had been asked some version of it several times in the past few days, and each time the honest answer was different. Tonight, the honest answer was something that didn't fit neatly into a word. Something like the specific physical sensation of having been carrying weight for so long that you've forgotten the weight is there and then feeling it shift. Like something is moving, he said, after a long time of nothing moving. She looked at him. That's a good thing. Ask me again in 48 hours, he said, when I know if it held. She almost smiled. I'll ask you again in 48 hours, she said. He picked up the coffee he had been neglecting and looked at the window. The city outside was its nighttime self, lit, in motion, indifferent to the machinery that had been set in motion today inside this building. But for the first time in 3 years, Logan's relationship to that indifference felt different. Not hostile, not threatening, just the city doing its thing, and him doing his. He thought about Ava in a car moving north, probably asleep against the window, avocado socks on, her backpack in her lap. He thought about what he had promised her. Every night. He would call her every night. He thought about what he'd said to Vivian, that he wasn't leaving her in the middle of this. He had said it as a tactical statement and known even as he said it that it was something else too. He hadn't examined what exactly. He was going to have to examine it soon, but not tonight. Tonight he stood in a kitchen 42 floors above a city that was about to find out the name Warren Voss and everything attached to it, and he let himself believe carefully, like testing weight on uncertain ice, that it was actually going to work, one step at a time. That had always been the way through. The 48 hours did not pass cleanly. They rarely did, Logan knew, when large things were in motion. The machinery of exposure, the legal kind, the kind that actually stuck, was never the swift and decisive event that people imagined from the outside. It was incremental and unglamorous and full of moments where nothing appeared to be happening, and then suddenly several things happened at once. And the space between those moments was filled with a specific kind of waiting that was harder than any action he had ever taken. Voss made one more move. It came at 11 in the morning on the second day, and it was not the armed escalation Logan had been preparing for. It was a lawyer, a very expensive one, dispatched to the DOJ's Chicago field office with a motion to suppress the evidence on the grounds that it had been obtained through unauthorized intelligence methods. It was a procedural play, the kind that could buy days or weeks in the right circumstances, and it told Logan something important. Voss was no longer in attack mode. He was in defense mode. He was trying to slow the machinery, not destroy it. Defense mode meant the structure was already collapsing inward. Patricia Huang called at noon and said the suppression motion had been reviewed and denied in 2 hours, which was unusual and indicated the level of priority the case had been assigned. She used the words expedited federal process and material national security interest, and then, off the record, said, "Tell your people it held." Logan was standing on the rooftop terrace when he took the call, the same rooftop where he had called Webb 2 days ago, the same November cold, the lake doing its gray thing at the eastern edge of everything. He stood there for a while after the call ended and looked at the water and let himself believe it. He called Ava. She answered on the first ring. "Did it work?" she said, because Webb had apparently kept her informed at a level appropriate for a 7-year-old who had decided she had a right to know what was happening, which was a decision Logan would discuss with Webb at some later point and probably not argue against. "It's working," he said. "Is it done?" "Not completely. These things take time, but the important part held." A pause. "General Webb says the important part is like when you push the first domino." "General Webb is right." "He's been teaching me chess," she said with the tone of someone reporting a mildly unexpected development. "Is he winning?" "I beat him twice," she said. "He says I'm cheating, but I'm not." "He said the same thing to me the first time I beat him," Logan said. 12 years ago. "So he's a bad loser." "He's an excellent loser," Logan said. "He just takes a while to accept it." He could hear her smile through the phone. It was a specific sound, barely audible, more of an exhaled quality than a laugh, but he had been listening to it for 7 years, and he knew it the same way he knew the creak of the floorboard outside her room, as one of the fixed coordinates of his life. "When are you coming?" she said. "Tomorrow," he said. "I'm coming tomorrow." Now, Gerald Hatch's office released a statement at 3 in the afternoon acknowledging that the congressman was cooperating fully with a federal inquiry into procurement irregularities and that he had voluntarily recused himself from all Armed Services Committee business pending the outcome. It was the statement of a man who had been told by very good lawyers that cooperation was the only remaining option, written in the language of someone trying to retain a fraction of dignity on the way down. Logan read it on Vivian's laptop at the kitchen island. She was beside him, reading the same screen. "He'll negotiate a plea," she said. "Yes. He'll give up Voss to do it." "That was always the plan," Logan said. "Hatch is a means to an end. He knows enough to be useful and not enough to be the primary target. He'll understand that quickly." "Will Voss fight it?" Logan thought about the voice on the phone 2 days ago, the recalibration in it. the specific quality of a man doing math and not liking the results. For a while, he said, he's not the kind of man who accepts things easily, but he'll look at the file and he'll look at Hatch and he'll look at Danny Reyes's statement and he'll understand that there isn't a version of this where he walks away intact. He paused. The best he can do now is manage the degree of damage. Is that enough? Vivian said. For you? He looked at the screen, at Hatch's careful political language wrapping around the fact of his own dismantling. It's not about what's enough for me, he said. It's about what actually happens. And what actually happens is that Voss goes to trial with a file that has been seen by enough people now that suppressing it would require suppressing the federal judiciary. His contractors lose their clearances. Kessler Group gets put under a compliance monitor that will find everything else they've buried. He looked at the table. The people who died, my teammate 8 years ago, they don't come back. That math doesn't change. He was quiet for a moment. But it stops. Whatever they were doing, it stops. Vivian was looking at him. That matters, she said. Yes, he said. It does. She put her hand on the table near his. Not on his hand, just near it. A proximity that was a statement of its own kind. He looked at it and then looked at her, and she looked back with the particular directness that was one of the things about her that he had stopped trying to find unsettling and had simply started accepting as a fact of who she was. I'm going to Michigan tomorrow, he said, to get Ava. I know. I want you to come. She was quiet for a moment. Logan, not to decide anything, he said. Not to figure out what any of this is. Just to come. She wants to show you Michigan. She told me to tell you it's supposed to be nice. Something moved in her face. Something that had been held carefully in place for several days and relaxed now, just slightly. She said that? Those were her exact words. Vivian looked at the window, at the city beyond it, gray and enormous and completely unaware of the specific moment happening in this kitchen. My company, she said. There are going to be things to handle. The board is going to have questions about the procurement records and the Kessler connection and what my involvement in all of this means for the company's regulatory position. That'll take weeks to fully resolve, Logan said. Michigan is 3 days. 3 days, she said, as if measuring the weight of it. Maybe 4, he said. She looked at him, a long moment of the kind she didn't usually allow, and not measuring, not calculating, just present. Okay, she said. 4 days. Warren Voss was taken into federal custody at 7:19 in the morning, 6 days after the first file reached Patricia Huang's office. Logan was in Michigan when it happened. He got the text from Webb, 2 words, no punctuation, the spare communication style of a man who did not believe in decorating facts. And he read it standing in the kitchen of a house that sat 40 yards from Lake Michigan's eastern shore, where the water was a different color than it was from the city, more green than gray, with white caps from the November wind that Ava had spent 2 days pretending to count. He read the text twice. Then he set the phone on the counter and looked out the window at the water. He had been waiting for this moment for 8 years. He had imagined it sometimes, in the specific way you imagine things that feel simultaneously inevitable and impossible, with a kind of suspended disbelief, a refusal to let yourself fully picture it, because picturing it required believing it might actually happen. He had imagined something dramatic maybe, some sense of resolution that arrived with weight and clarity, a feeling you could name. What he actually felt was quieter than that. It was closer to the feeling of a sound stopping. Not the presence of something new, but the absence of something that had been there so long you'd stopped hearing it. A frequency that had been running underneath everything for 8 years. A constant low vibration that he had organized his life around, and that was now simply gone. He stood at the window for a while. Ava came in from the back door with sand on her shoes, which meant she had been down at the water despite the cold, which was a conversation for later. Who texted? She said. General Webb. What did he say? Logan looked at his daughter. She was wearing the coat that was slightly too big because he had bought it a size ahead to save money, and her hair was wind-scrambled, and there was a look on her face that was trying to be casual and not quite managing it, because she had her mother's eyes, and her mother had never quite managed casual either. It's over, he said. She looked at him for a moment, Then she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around his waist again, the same way she had in the penthouse 4 days ago, and he put both arms around her. The shoulder had been assessed by a doctor Webb knew and declared bruised but intact. And they stood like that in a kitchen in Michigan with sand on her shoes and the lake outside, and 8 years of something finally, actually over. "Okay," she said into his jacket. "Yeah," he said. "Are we safe now?" "Yes," he said, and meant it, for the first time in 3 years, completely. Vivienne had been on calls most of the morning. Her board had convened an emergency session, and she had taken it from the house's small office, her voice audible through the door as a controlled, assured cadence that never rose to anything that sounded like distress. Even when Logan, passing in the hallway, caught fragments that suggested significant corporate upheaval on the other end of the line. She came out at noon with the look of someone who had just finished dismantling and reassembling a complicated piece of machinery and was neither pleased nor displeased about it. Simply done. "How bad?" Logan said. "Manageable," she said. "3 board members want my resignation. 4 are with me. 2 are waiting to see how the regulatory review goes." She poured coffee with the same efficiency she applied to everything. "The Kessler connection is going to be a liability for about 6 months. After that, once it's clear that I was a target rather than a participant, it becomes an asset." She looked at him over the cup. "People prefer a CEO who survived a corruption attempt to one who was never tested." "You've already thought through the recovery arc," he said. "I thought through it on the drive up," she said. "I think better in cars." "You could have told me. I was driving." "You were concentrating," she said. "You had a look." "What look?" "The one where you're running calculations," she said. "I've learned not to interrupt it." He looked at her. She looked back. They had been doing this for 4 days. The specific back and forth of 2 people who had been through something significant together, and were now in the slightly strange territory of what came after significant, where the urgency was gone and what remained was just the ordinary texture of being in the same space. It was not uncomfortable. That was the thing he kept noticing. It should have been 2 people who had known each other for 10 days thrown together by violence and legal strategy and a 7-year-old's blunt assessments. But it wasn't. It was, if anything, easier than most things had been for a long time. "What are you going to do?" she said. "After." He had been thinking about this in the quiet moments, the early mornings at the lake, the drives, the spaces between things. He had thought about the apartment on West 47th, about the Meridian Tower renovation that had probably moved on without him, about Raymond Hargrove and the post-it note and the bracelet with the correct clasp. He had thought about what his name was going to be. The real one. The one he hadn't said out loud in 3 years, which Webb had assured him would be formally restored as part of the legal resolution. He had thought about what Ava needed. A school. Stability. A life that didn't require her to be brave all the time, which she was capable of, but shouldn't have to sustain indefinitely. "I've been thinking about teaching," he said. Vivienne raised her eyebrows slightly. "History," he said. "I have a degree. I got it before the Navy, before everything. I never used it." He paused. "Ava needs a school. I need something to do that isn't construction or combat. History seems, I don't know, honest. Things happen, they can be documented. There are lessons if you're willing to look at them." He looked at the window. "I'm tired of living in ways that require me to be something I don't want to be. Teaching seems like the opposite of that." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. "That's a good reason," she said. "It's a practical reason." "The best reasons usually are," she said. "Where?" He looked at her. The question was more specific than it appeared on the surface, and they both knew it. "I don't know yet," he said. "Somewhere smaller than Chicago, somewhere Ava can be a kid without it being complicated." "There's a town," Vivienne said slowly, like she was deciding whether to say this as she said it. "On the coast, North Carolina. I looked at property there 2 years ago. I didn't buy it because I thought, I don't know what I thought, that it wasn't practical, that I didn't have a reason." She looked at her coffee. "Good schools, small enough that you know your neighbors. Big enough that it has things to do. It's on the water." He looked at her for a long moment. "You researched it," he said. "I researched several places," she said, with the careful precision of someone establishing that this was not a singular act of significance. "When did you research them?" Last night, she said, when I couldn't sleep. He was quiet. She was quiet. Outside, the Michigan wind pushed the water into its whitecaps, and Ava's voice was audible from somewhere at the back of the house, apparently in conversation with someone, possibly Webb, possibly the wind, possibly herself, which was not uncommon. I'm not asking you to decide anything, Vivian said, in the same tone he had used 4 days ago in a kitchen 42 floors above Chicago. I'm just saying there are options. I know, he said. I know there are options. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was something in the space between them that had been building for 10 days through jewelry store, adrenaline, and night attacks and legal strategy, and 4 in the morning honesty and a 7-year-old's unsparing observations, and neither of them was going to name it today. Today was for letting things settle, for allowing the seismic rearrangement of the last week to stop moving before you tried to understand the new terrain. But he looked at her, and he thought about the North Carolina coast, and he thought about a man who had spent 8 years not being allowed to want things, and what it might feel like to start wanting things again. I'll think about it, he said. That's enough, she said. Webb left the next morning, driven back to Chicago by the same car service, standing in the driveway in the November cold with his coat buttoned and his case in hand, and the expression of a man who had done the thing he had been waiting to do and was ready to return to his ordinary life. He shook Logan's hand, held it. Your record will be formally restored within 60 days, he said. I'll handle the bureaucratic end. You won't have to be in any room you don't want to be in. He paused. The name is yours again, if you want it. Logan thought about the name. His name. The one before Logan Hayes, before West 47th, before 3 years of necessary invisibility. It belonged to a man who had been a husband and a Navy SEAL, and a person with a past that included both honor and the specific sorrow of seeing that honor corrupted by someone he had trusted. It also belonged to a man who had made a daughter with a woman he had loved, and who had kept that daughter alive and fed and growing for 3 years with imperfect, exhausted, determined love. I'll take it back, he said. Webb nodded. Something in his face was doing something that he would not have called emotional, and that was, in fact, exactly that. You did well, Webb said, the whole time, even when it didn't feel like it. I had help, Logan said. You let yourself have help, Webb said. That's different. That's the harder part. He let go of Logan's hand. Take care of your daughter. I always have. I know. Webb looked at the house behind Logan. And take care of the other one, too. She's worth it. He got in the car. Logan watched it go down the road until it turned and disappeared behind the tree line, and then he stood in the driveway for a moment longer with the cold on his face and the sound of the lake behind the house, and everything that had just ended and everything that was going to start, occupying the same moment. Ava found out about the North Carolina idea approximately 6 hours after Webb left, which was approximately how long it took Vivian to mention it once in passing, and for Ava to register the mention and begin asking questions with the systematic thoroughness she applied to things she had decided mattered. Is it by the ocean? She asked at dinner. The coast, Vivian said. So, yes, technically. Is it warm? Warmer than here. Do they have good schools? Vivian looked at Logan. Logan looked at his food. I believe so, Vivian said. What kind of fish are in the ocean there? Several kinds, Vivian said. I'd have to look it up. Ava considered this. Dad said he'd think about it. He did, Vivian confirmed. He takes a long time to think about things sometimes, Ava said, not unkindly. It was an observation, accurate and without judgment, the way she offered most of her observations. But when he decides, he means it. Vivian looked at Logan again. He was looking at his plate, and his jaw had the particular quality it had when he was trying not to react to something Ava had said, which Vivian had learned over 4 days meant he was either moved or amused, or both. That's a fair assessment, Vivian said. He's going to say yes, Ava said. She went back to her dinner with the calm certainty of someone who has resolved the question internally and is waiting for the external world to catch up. He just needs to get there himself. The table was quiet for a moment. How do you know? Logan said. Ava looked up. Because you're happy here, she said. You think I don't notice, but I notice. She pointed her fork at him with the comfortable authority of someone who has earned the right to make this observation. You've been happy for 4 days, and you haven't been happy like this for a really long time, and you're not going to want to stop. Logan looked at his daughter. 7 years old, sand perpetually on her shoes, absolute convictions about cereal and pajama socks and when it was acceptable to turn on lights, and the sharpest pair of eyes he had ever been subjected to in his life. Her mother's eyes. He looked at Vivian. She was looking at him with an expression that was carefully not presuming anything and was also, completely, saying everything. I need to find a job first, he said. North Carolina has schools, Ava said. And I need to figure out where we'd live. North Carolina has houses, Ava said. And, Dad, she put her fork down. You already decided. You're just finishing the sentences. The table was quiet. Then Vivian made a sound, small, quick, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can decide whether to let it out, and covered her mouth with her hand. Logan looked at her. She looked at him. The laugh was still in her eyes. She's not wrong, Vivian said. I know, Logan said. He looked at the table, at the dinner they had made together, imperfectly, collaboratively, with some disagreement about whether the pasta needed more salt, which Ava had resolved by adding the salt herself. At the window, where the November lake was dark and moving. At a woman who had walked into a jewelry store on a random Wednesday and changed the geometry of his life without intending to, and who had shown up in every consequential moment since then with the kind of steady, unapologetic capability that he had spent 3 years believing he would never let himself trust again. At his daughter, who had been right. Yeah, he said. Okay. They went back to Chicago 3 days later. The apartment on West 47th was the same as he had left it. Water stain on the wall in the upper corner, creak in the third floorboard, chain lock on the door. He stood in it for an hour, walking through the rooms with the specific attention of someone saying goodbye to a place, and thought about all the ways this apartment had been exactly what he needed and all the ways it had always been temporary, a shelter rather than a home, a holding pattern rather than a life. He packed what mattered. It wasn't much. Some of Ava's things. A photograph of her mother that he kept in the kitchen drawer, because keeping it on the wall had felt like something he wasn't ready for, and keeping it hidden had felt like something he wasn't willing to do, so the drawer had been the compromise. Some books. His discharge papers, the real ones, which he had kept in a waterproof case at the back of the closet for 3 years because they contained the only official record of who he actually was. He held the photograph for a moment. Sarah, at a beach somewhere, 29 years old, laughing at something off camera. Her hair in the wind. The specific quality of the laugh, which he had heard for real for years before he only had this version of it. He thought about what it meant to move forward. People used the phrase like it implied leaving something behind, but that had never been his experience of it. Moving forward, in his experience, meant carrying things differently. The weight didn't go away. You just got better at distributing it. He put the photograph in the box. Carefully, not in the drawer, in the box where it could travel with him. That was the difference, not leaving it, carrying it differently. He closed the apartment door and did not look back at it. The legal resolution took 61 days, which was 3 days longer than Webb had estimated and substantially faster than anyone else had thought possible, which said something about the quality of the file and the motivation of the people who handled it. Warren Voss was charged with espionage, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and 2 counts related to the coordination of the attacks in Chicago. Gerald Hatch accepted a plea agreement that included full cooperation with the prosecution and a sentence that his lawyers had worked very hard to make as lenient as possible, and which was, nonetheless, substantial. Sandra Lyle, the procurement officer, cooperated immediately and completely, which was consistent with what Logan had understood about people who participate in corruption for financial rather than ideological reasons. They fold when the financial calculation reverses. Danny Reyes was called as a witness. He gave his testimony in a federal courtroom in Washington, and Logan watched the live stream from a house in North Carolina with a coffee that had gone cold and Ava doing homework at the kitchen table and Vivian on a call in the next room. When Reyes finished speaking, Logan turned off the stream and sat quietly for a while. He thought about a 29-year-old signals analyst who had told the truth and had it taken from him, who had spent 8 years with that weight and who had just put it down in a room full of people who were required to listen. It mattered. He let himself feel that it mattered. His name, his real name, James Callum Cole, a name that had been someone else's for 3 years, was formally restored on a Tuesday, attached to a legal filing that also expunged the fabricated charges and reinstated his honorable discharge. Webb called to tell him. Logan was standing in the backyard of the house, which had a small dock that jutted into a tidal creek, and he stood on the dock with the phone and looked at the water. "James," Webb said, using it deliberately. "Yeah," Logan said. It sounded strange and also exactly right, the way things sound when they've been away long enough that returning to them requires a small adjustment. "It's done," Webb said. "It's done," Logan said. He stood on the dock for a while after the call. The creek was moving, tidal, the water gray-green in the November light. Herons worked the opposite bank with the focused patience of creatures that had never once questioned what they were supposed to be doing. A pelican crossed overhead with the particular ungainly grace of pelicans, which were absurd birds that somehow made flight look like the most natural thing in the world. He thought about what Webb had said in Chicago. "You're not alone anymore." He had not been sure, when Webb said it, whether to believe it. He had believed it enough to try. That was all you could ever really do with things that mattered. Believe them enough to try and see what held. The house in North Carolina was not perfect. The kitchen had a faucet that dripped, despite 3 separate attempts to fix it. The backyard sloped at an angle that made furniture arrangement a recurring negotiation. The nearest grocery store was 20 minutes away, which Ava had declared unacceptable before revising her position when she discovered they sold dinosaur cereal. Vivian had bought it. Logan had resisted this for a month, on the grounds that it was her money and his life, and the intersection of those two things was complicated. They had argued about it in the careful, honest way they had learned to argue about things. Not around the real point, but directly at it. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me," Vivian had said. "I don't feel like I owe you," he said. "I feel like you bought the house." "Those are the same thing." "They're not," he said. "One is about obligation and one is about keeping score, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life keeping score with you. You have more money than me. You bought the house. I'm going to pay you back over time because that's what makes me feel like a person rather than a project. We can call that an agreement." She had looked at him for a long moment. "You're infuriatingly reasonable sometimes," she said. "Only sometimes?" "Don't push it," she said. He paid her back in the way he had said he would, which was slowly, and she received the payments the way he needed her to, which was without comment. That was one of the things about her he had come to rely on. She understood which battles were about the substance, and which were about the self-respect required to engage with the substance at all, and she did not confuse them. He found a job at a high school 12 miles north, teaching American history to juniors who arrived in his classroom with the universal teenage conviction that the past was irrelevant, and who left, most of them, with at least a working theory that it wasn't. He was not a natural teacher in the performance sense. He didn't do voices or theatrical gestures or the kind of showmanship that made some teachers memorable. What he did was take things seriously and look students in the eye when they asked questions, and never pretend that history was simple or clean or that the people in it had been anything other than human, which meant flawed and driven by things they didn't fully understand and capable of both great harm and unexpected redemption. His students seemed to find this more interesting than they expected to. Ava started 3rd grade at the elementary school in town, which had a principal who wore cardigans and spoke to children like they were small people rather than inconveniences, which Ava assessed in her first week and reported back favorably. She made 2 friends by October, one named Delia, who was missing a front tooth and had strong opinions about everything, and one named Marcus, who was quiet and very fast at math, and who Ava had decided was interesting in the specific way that quiet people were interesting, which was that you had to pay attention to find out what was actually going on. She still wore the avocado socks. She still had absolute convictions about cereal. She still woke up sometimes at 5 in the morning and padded around the house in the dark. And Logan still heard her, and sometimes he got up too, and they sat in the kitchen together in the quiet of the early coast morning, not always talking, and it was one of the best things in his life. Vivian transitioned out of day-to-day operations at Sinclair Pharmaceutical in February, which was not a retreat. and she was clear about that. She retained her board seat and a significant ownership stake, and she appointed a CEO she had been quietly grooming for 18 months, a woman named Julia Park, who had been her head of operations and who had a management style that was both rigorous and human, which Vivian considered non-negotiable. What Vivian redirected toward was a foundation: healthcare access in underserved communities, medical supply infrastructure for clinics that couldn't compete for the same resources as large hospitals, a children's health initiative that she ran with the same focused precision she had brought to everything, but with a different quality to the work, a less defended quality. She told Logan once, sitting on the dock at the end of the day with the creek going out on the tide, that it felt like the difference between building something for leverage and building something because it mattered. "The company always mattered to me," she said. "But it mattered because I built it, because it was mine. The foundation matters because of what it does." She looked at the water. "That sounds like a distinction that should have been obvious." "It's not obvious when you're inside the building," he said. "No," she said. "It's really not." They sat on the dock. The creek moved. The light was the particular low gold of late afternoon in November. The same month all of this had started, a year ago now, though the year felt simultaneously longer and shorter than that, compressed in some places, extended in others the way time moved when it was full. She leaned against him, slightly, not dramatically, just the small adjustment of a person finding a more comfortable position that happened to be closer to another person. He did not adjust away from it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Do you miss it? The other thing, what you were?" He thought about it honestly because she always asked things honestly, and he had learned not to give her less than that. "Sometimes," he said, "not the violence, not the danger, but the clarity of it. When you're in a situation like that, everything else falls away. There's only the problem and the solution and the space between them. It's very simple." He paused. "My life is not very simple now. Is that bad?" "No," he said. "Simple was easier. This is better." She was quiet for a moment. "That distinction sounds like it should have been obvious." He looked at her. "It's not obvious when you're inside the building," he said. She looked back at him. Something in her face did the thing it sometimes did, which was open in a way that she didn't always permit, that she had been permitting more over the months, gradually, the way trust actually worked, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small decisions to keep trying. He thought about a man in a jewelry store who had made a choice, not a heroic choice, not a calculated one, not even a particularly conscious one, a choice made in the space between one moment and the next, out of a refusal to be someone who could have done something and didn't. He had not known, when he stood up from behind that display case, what he was beginning. He had thought he was ending something, his invisibility, his safety, the careful structure of a life built around not being found. He had been wrong. He had been beginning something. That was the thing nobody told you about the choices that changed your life. They didn't look like turning points when you were in them. They looked like 40 seconds in a jewelry store. They looked like a 7-year-old's hand in yours and a woman's voice behind you saying your name like it was already familiar. They looked like standing up when it would have been easier and safer and more rational to stay down. You didn't know what you were beginning. You just chose. And then you lived in what you'd built. Ava came down the path from the house to the dock, slightly breathless from running, which meant she had thought of something she needed to say and had not wanted to wait until it came up naturally. "Delia says her family is having a bonfire Saturday," she announced. "She said I could come, and also I could bring my family." She looked at both of them. "So, can we go?" Logan looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Logan. "Yes," they said, at almost the same moment. Ava nodded with satisfaction. She sat down on the dock between them and dangled her feet over the edge toward the water and looked at the creek with the contentment of someone who has done what she came to do and can now simply be. The three of them sat on the dock as the light changed and the creek went out with the tide, and the birds worked the opposite bank, and the world proceeded with its unhurried, enormous, indifferent business. Logan looked at his daughter. He looked at the woman beside him. He looked at the water. He thought about a 7-year-old who had grown up brave because she had to, and who was now growing up happy instead, Not because happiness was a guarantee or a right or something anyone could arrange on another person's behalf, but because it had been made possible, day by day, by the ordinary stubborn work of two imperfect adults who had decided to try. He thought about what it meant to protect something. He had spent his life thinking protection was about standing between the threat and the thing you loved. And that was true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that protection was also this: the dock, the light, the creek, the ordinary evening. Showing up for it, being present in it, refusing to let the fear of losing it prevent you from having it. That was the harder mission. He had been bad at it for a long time. He was getting better. The water moved, the light went, the dock held. And for the man who had spent 8 years believing his story had ended in a government office with fabricated charges and a forced name, who had spent 3 years believing survival was the most he could reasonably ask for, who had stood up in a jewelry store not because he was a hero, but because he was simply unable to be the other thing. For that man, sitting on this dock on this evening, in this life that was not perfect and was not simple and was entirely, unambiguously his, it turned out the greatest mission had been here all along. He had just needed to stop running long enough to find it.